Imagine discovering a civilization so powerful that they dominated vast territories for over 600 years, yet most people have never heard their name. Picture warriors so skilled that even the mighty Roman Empire feared them, and a culture so advanced that they revolutionized warfare, art, and trade across ancient Eurasia. Today we're uncovering the incredible story of the Sarmatians, a nomadic empire that emerged from nothing and changed the course of history forever. What archaeologists have recently discovered about their origins will completely blow your mind. Deep beneath the grasslands of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, archaeologists have been uncovering one of history's most remarkable transformations. We're talking about the birth of the Sarmatian peoples, a story that begins in the vast Pontic-Caspian steppes and represents one of the most significant cultural evolutions in ancient Eurasian history. What makes this discovery absolutely fascinating is the sheer scale of evidence scattered across thousands of miles, from the Don River's banks to the towering Ural Mountains. Excavation sites are revealing a complex story of cultural transformation that started around the 7th century BC. This wasn't just another group of ancient people changing their ways, this was the gradual emergence of what would become one of antiquity's most formidable nomadic confederations. The first distinctly Sarmatian cultural traces appeared around 650 BC in burial complexes along the lower Volga River. These weren't ordinary graves, they were elaborate burial mounds called kurgans that contained something extraordinary. What archaeologists found inside completely revolutionized our understanding of ancient steppe cultures. These early burial sites revealed an incredible amalgamation of inherited Scythian traditions mixed with innovative cultural elements that would define Sarmatian civilization for centuries. The grave goods from sites like Blumenfeld and Susli tell an amazing story through bronze cauldrons featuring distinctive animal-shaped handles, iron weapons decorated with unique artistic motifs, and horse harness fittings that demonstrated both continuity with earlier traditions and remarkable departures in creative expression. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. This transformation wasn't sudden. The transition from Scythian to Sarmatian material culture represented a gradual process of cultural synthesis spanning nearly 2 centuries. This slow evolution created something entirely new while respecting ancient traditions. The Filipovka Cemetery complex provides particularly illuminating evidence of this incredible transformation. This site contains burials spanning from the 6th to 4th centuries BC, showing clear evolution in burial practices, weapon types, and decorative arts. Early Sarmatian graves maintained the Scythian tradition of burying horses alongside warriors, but introduced revolutionary elements like tamgas carved into metal objects, and a distinctive style of polychrome jewelry featuring garnet and glass inlays. What's absolutely fascinating is how pottery assemblages from these early Sarmatian sites demonstrate technological innovations that clearly distinguished them from their Scythian predecessors. Hand-built vessels with distinctive rim profiles and surface treatments appear consistently across Sarmatian territories, suggesting the development of shared cultural norms across geographically dispersed communities. These ceramic innovations indicate that Sarmatian potters developed new firing techniques, producing harder, more durable vessels, perfectly suited for increased mobility demands. Archaeological evidence also reveals dramatic changes in settlement patterns during this formative period. While Scythian communities maintained semi-permanent settlements with substantial earthwork fortifications, early Sarmatian sites show a marked preference for temporary camps with minimal architectural investment. Excavations at sites like Kalinovka uncovered circular arrangements of post holes indicating portable structures alongside large quantities of animal bones, suggesting intensive livestock management. This shift reflects the Sarmatians' adaptation to a thoroughly nomadic lifestyle. The linguistic evidence provides crucial insights into the ethnogenetic processes occurring in the Pontic-Caspian steppes during this period. Sarmatian belonged to the Eastern Iranian branch of the Indo-European language family, sharing common ancestry with Scythian, but developing distinct characteristics that set it apart from its predecessors. Comparative linguistic analysis of Sarmatian personal names and tribal ethnonyms preserved in Greek and Latin sources reveals systematic sound changes occurring during the 6th and 5th centuries BC. The relationship between Sarmatian and Scythian languages appears to have been dialectal divergence rather than complete linguistic replacement. Both languages shared Eastern Iranian innovations, while Sarmatian developed unique features like retaining certain Proto-Iranian vowel qualities lost in Scythian. Personal names preserved in Greek inscriptions from Black Sea colonies provide valuable evidence for Sarmatian linguistic development. Names like Aspergus, Rhodines, and Farneses demonstrate characteristic Sarmatian phonological features, suggesting distinct language development by the 5th century BC, while maintaining mutual intelligibility with Scythian for several generations. The tribal confederations emerging during the early Sarmatian period reflect complex political and social reorganization processes across the steppes. Historical sources identify several major Sarmatian groupings: the Sarmate along the lower Volga, the Saraises in the Kuban region, and the Abursi controlling territories between the Don and Volga rivers. These weren't static political entities, but fluid alliances of kinship groups that could expand, contract, or reorganize based on changing circumstances. Archaeological evidence suggests confederation formation was closely linked to specialized pastoral economy development. Faunal remains from Sarmatian sites show marked increases in horse breeding compared to earlier periods, with horses comprising up to 40% of livestock assemblages at some sites. This intensive horse breeding supported military activities and the production of mare's milk products that became Sarmatian diet and trade network staples. The transition to fully nomadic pastoralism represented fundamental Sarmatian society reorganization occurring gradually between the 6th and 4th centuries BC. Earlier semi-nomadic communities practiced seasonal mobility while maintaining permanent base camps, but fully nomadic groups abandoned fixed settlements entirely for year-round movement following optimal grazing conditions. This transformation required sophisticated grassland ecology knowledge, weather pattern understanding, and seasonal migration route familiarity encoded in oral traditions and passed down through generations. The development of nomadic pastoralism was facilitated by portable technology, innovations enhancing mobility without sacrificing material comfort. Archaeological evidence reveals collapsible wooden tent frames, lightweight yet durable cooking vessels, and modular horse harness systems that could be quickly assembled or disassembled. These technological innovations allowed Sarmatian communities to maintain complex material cultures while achieving unprecedented mobility levels, setting the stage for their eventual dominance across vast Eurasian territories. But what truly drove these remarkable transformations wasn't just cultural evolution, it was the environment itself forcing these changes. The climate data we have today reveals something absolutely fascinating about the 7th and 6th centuries BC. The Pontic-Caspian steppes were experiencing dramatic climate fluctuations, including periods of increased dryness that completely changed the game for these nomadic peoples. Think about it. When your traditional grazing lands can no longer support your herds, you have two choices: adapt or perish. The Sarmatians chose to adapt, and they did it brilliantly. These environmental pressures didn't just encourage longer migration patterns, they actually contributed to the political fragmentation that would become a defining characteristic of early Sarmatian society. Here's where the story gets really incredible. These climate changes directly influence what would become the Sarmatians' most distinctive feature, their legendary horse culture. The increased aridity actually favored the development of hardy horse breeds perfectly adapted to steppe conditions. Meanwhile, the need for greater mobility in response to these environmental challenges sparked innovations in riding techniques and horse management that were revolutionary for their time. The archaeological evidence from horse burials tells an amazing story of technological advancement. We're seeing the development of improved bit designs and saddle technologies that dramatically enhance the effectiveness of both mounted warfare and herding activities. But the Sarmatians weren't just improving existing techniques, they were completely reimagining what horses could do. Their approach to horse breeding was unlike anything seen before. While other cultures focused on speed, the Sarmatians emphasized producing large, powerful animals suitable for both warfare and long-distance travel. When scientists analyzed horse remains from Sarmatian sites, they discovered something remarkable. These animals averaged 140 to 145 centimeters in height, significantly larger than typical steppe horses of earlier periods. These weren't just horses, they were living weapons of war bred for strength and endurance. But horses meant more to the Sarmatians than just practical tools. The integration of horse culture into their social and religious life went far beyond simple considerations of mobility and warfare. Horses occupied central positions in Sarmatian burial practices, with wealthy individuals being interred alongside multiple horses equipped with elaborate harness fittings and decorative elements. Their artistic traditions frequently depicted horses in metalwork, textiles, and carved bone objects, showing just how deeply these animals were embedded in their cultural identity. The environmental adaptations that characterized early Sarmatian culture also included sophisticated strategies for managing livestock diversity that were absolutely ingenious. Archaeological evidence suggests that Sarmatian communities maintained mixed herds of horses, cattle, sheep, and goats in proportions that varied according to local environmental conditions and seasonal requirements. This diversified approach to pastoralism provided resilience against environmental fluctuations while supporting the complex social hierarchies emerging within Sarmatian tribal confederations. These harsh steppe environments also encouraged the development of durable multi-purpose tools and weapons that could withstand the rigors of nomadic life. Sarmatian metalworkers developed distinctive techniques for producing iron weapons with enhanced durability, including sophisticated heat treatment processes that created blades capable of maintaining sharp edges under the most demanding conditions. Now comes one of the most dramatic chapters in this entire story, the massive westward expansion that would reshape the entire Black Sea region forever. What happened during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC was nothing short of a demographic and political upheaval that ranks among the most significant in ancient Eurasian history. The Sarmatian expansion westward wasn't just a migration mission, it was a systematic conquest that fundamentally altered the balance of power across the entire region. This westward movement began as early as 350 BC, when Sarmatian warbands first crossed the Don River in significant numbers, initiating a process that would ultimately displace the Scythian kingdoms that had dominated the region for over 3 centuries. What triggered this massive demographic shift was a perfect storm of converging pressures. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Volga River indicates increasing population density during the 4th century BC, evidenced by the proliferation of burial mounds and settlement sites. At the same time, climatic data shows a period of increased aridity beginning around 340 BC, which reduced grassland productivity and forced pastoral communities to seek new territories. But here's what made this expansion possible. Night to the political fragmentation occurring within the Scythian realm provided the Sarmatians with unprecedented opportunities. The death of the Scythian king Ateas in 339 BC, during his campaign against Philip II of Macedon, had left the Scythian confederations without centralized leadership. This created power vacuums that Sarmatian war leaders were quick to exploit. The Sarmatians didn't simply occupy abandoned territories, they systematically displaced Scythian populations through a combination of military pressure and economic competition. The mechanics of Sarmatian territorial acquisition involved sophisticated strategies that went far beyond simple military conquest. They would initially establish seasonal camps in contested border regions, gradually increasing their presence until they achieved numerical superiority over local Scythian populations. What's absolutely fascinating is how this transformation represented a fundamental shift in steppe warfare tactics. While Scythian military doctrine had emphasized mobility and archery, relying on light cavalry equipped with composite bows, the Sarmatians revolutionized everything with their heavy cavalry innovations that would later influence military developments across Europe and beyond. Now here's where the story becomes absolutely mind-blowing. The Sarmatians developed something that would revolutionize warfare forever. Heavy cavalry formations capable of delivering devastating shock attacks that could shatter entire enemy armies. This wasn't just an evolution in tactics. It was a complete transformation of how wars were fought on the steppes. What made this possible was a perfect combination of technological advances in metallurgy and armor production, along with changes in horse breeding that produced larger, stronger mounts capable of carrying heavily armored warriors into battle. The development of what became known as cataphract warfare among the Sarmatians occurred gradually during the 4th century BC, with archaeological evidence suggesting that the earliest experiments with heavy cavalry equipment began around 350 BC. The excavations at the Kasika cemetery have revealed something absolutely incredible. Ear fragments of iron scale armor and horse camphrons that demonstrate the sophisticated metallurgical techniques required to produce effective protection for both rider and mount. This scale armor consisted of small iron plates, typically measuring just 2 to 3 centimeters in length, that were sewn onto leather backing in overlapping patterns. The genius of this design was that it provided flexibility while maintaining complete protective coverage. But the real game changer was the famous Sarmatian lance known to classical authors as the contus. These weapons were absolutely massive manajeva, measuring between 3.5 and 4.5 meters in length, and were constructed from ashwood with iron points and counterweights that allowed mounted warriors to deliver charges that were nothing short of devastating. The contus required specialized training techniques and horse breeds capable of maintaining stability during high-speed attacks, leading to the development of distinctive Sarmatian cavalry tactics that emphasize coordinated charge formations rather than individual combat prowess. The archaeological evidence for the contus comes primarily from burial contexts where these weapons were often broken and placed alongside deceased warriors, showing just how revered these weapons were. The Novocherkassk treasure, discovered in 1864, contains several contus points along with other military equipment that demonstrates the incredibly high status accorded to heavy cavalry warriors within Sarmatian society. What's absolutely fascinating is that metallurgical analysis of these weapons reveals sophisticated forging techniques that produced points capable of penetrating both scale armor and shield systems used by contemporary armies. This wasn't just brute force Morse, this was advanced military engineering. The tactical employment of cataphract formations required extensive coordination between individual warriors and their mounts, leading to the development of specialized training regimens that began in childhood. Young Sarmatian nobles learned to ride and fight as part of integrated cavalry units, practicing complex maneuvers that allowed formations of 50 to 100 cataphracts to operate as perfectly coordinated tactical entities. These formations could deliver concentrated shock attacks that proved devastatingly effective against the lighter Scythian cavalry formations that had previously dominated steppe warfare. But the Sarmatians didn't stop there. The transformation of their military capabilities also included innovations in siege warfare and the capture of fortified positions. Unlike their nomadic predecessors who typically avoided prolonged sieges, Sarmatian warbands developed techniques for capturing Greek colonial cities and Scythian fortified settlements. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Neapolis shows evidence of systematic siege techniques, including the construction of earthwork ramps and the use of captured siege equipment to breach defensive walls. The success of this westward expansion led to the establishment of major Sarmatian tribal confederations that would reshape the entire region's political landscape. The Roxolani emerged as the most powerful confederation, controlling territories between the Dnieper and Dniester rivers that included some of the richest agricultural lands in the Pontic region. What's remarkable is that archaeological evidence suggests the Roxolani developed sophisticated administrative systems for managing both nomadic populations and sedentary agricultural communities that had been incorporated into their territories. The Isages established themselves in the region between the Dniester and Danube rivers, positioning themselves to control crucial trade routes between the Greek cities of the western Black Sea coast and the barbarian territories of Central Europe. The strategic genius of the Isages' territorial choices allowed them to extract tribute from merchant caravans while maintaining access to manufactured goods from Greek workshops. Excavations at sites associated with the Isages reveal extensive trade networks that brought Mediterranean luxury goods deep into the steppe regions. The Sarmatians maintained control over the Kuban River region and the eastern shores of the Sea of Azov, territories that provided access to Caucasus trade routes and the rich agricultural lands of the Taman Peninsula. The Sarmatians developed particularly close relationships with the Greek cities of the Bosporan Kingdom, serving as military allies and trading partners while maintaining their nomadic lifestyle and political independence. The material culture from Sarmatians' sites shows extensive Greek influence, particularly in metalwork techniques and artistic styles. Meanwhile, the Aorsi Confederation controlled the vast territories between the Don and Volga rivers, maintaining the traditional Sarmatian heartlands while extending their influence westward into newly conquered regions. The Aorsi appear to have maintained the most conservative approach to territorial organization, preserving traditional nomadic practices while adapting to the challenges of governing expanded territories. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Aorsi developed sophisticated systems for managing seasonal migrations across territories that stretched over 1,000 kilometers from east to west. The impact of Sarmatian expansion on existing populations varied dramatically depending on local circumstances and the strategies employed by individual confederations. In some regions, particularly along major river valleys, Scythian populations were completely displaced or absorbed through intermarriage and cultural assimilation. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Kamenskoye Gorodish shows clear discontinuities in material culture that indicate population replacement rather than gradual cultural change. In other areas, particularly in marginal territories or regions with established Greek colonial presence, Sarmatian expansion resulted in more complex patterns of coexistence and cultural synthesis. The Greek cities of the northern Black Sea coast initially maintained their independence through a clever strategy of playing different Sarmatian confederations against each other, providing military subsidies and trade concessions to prevent any single group from achieving regional dominance. What's truly remarkable is how the transformation of the Pontic steppe political landscape involved not only the displacement of Scythian populations, but also the integration of diverse ethnic groups into expanding Sarmatian confederations. Archaeological evidence suggests that Thracian, Maeotian, and various Caucasian populations were incorporated into Sarmatian political structures, contributing specialized skills and local knowledge that enhanced the effectiveness of Sarmatian territorial control. What's absolutely remarkable is how this process of ethnic integration created something completely unprecedented: intercomplex hierarchical societies that brilliantly combined nomadic pastoral traditions with elements of sedentary agricultural and urban life. This wasn't just conquest, this was cultural fusion on a massive scale. The economic foundations of Sarmatian territorial expansion rested on their genius ability to control and tax trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with the vast resources of the Eurasian steppes and forest zones. The Sarmatians didn't just inherit Scythian trade networks as they expanded and revolutionized them, developing new commercial relationships that reflected their superior military capabilities and territorial control. The export of grain from newly conquered agricultural territories provided Sarmatian confederations with resources that could be exchanged for manufactured goods and luxury items from Greek workshops. What's fascinating is how the integration of agricultural populations into Sarmatian political structures represented a significant departure from traditional nomadic practices. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Dnieper Valley shows the development of hybrid settlement patterns that combine seasonal nomadic camps with permanent agricultural villages. These settlements were strategically located near river valleys that provided both excellent grazing and arable land, allowing Sarmatian communities to diversify their economic base while maintaining their cherished pastoral traditions. This was adaptive brilliance at its finest. The consolidation of Sarmatian territories across the Pontic steppes during the 3rd century BC created the conditions for the emergence of one of antiquity's most complex nomadic societies. Archaeological evidence from major cemetery complexes such as Prokhorovka, Suzli, and Kalinovka reveals a sophisticated social hierarchy that differed markedly from both their Scythian predecessors and contemporary nomadic confederations elsewhere in Eurasia. But here's what makes the Sarmatian story absolutely incredible. The social structure was fundamentally built around a warrior aristocracy, but one that incorporated unique elements of gender equality and military participation that distinguished it from every other Indo-European society of the period. The apex of Sarmatian society consisted of a hereditary warrior nobility whose status was maintained through a combination of martial prowess, livestock wealth, and control over trade networks. Excavations at the Novokirkos Chem cemetery complex have revealed elite burials that are nothing short of spectacular individuals interred with complete sets of cataphract armor, multiple horses with elaborate harness fittings, and grave goods that include imported Greek vessels, Chinese silk fragments, and Indian precious stones. These elite warriors were buried in massive kurgans measuring up to 15 meters in height and 80 meters in diameter, requiring the coordinated labor of hundreds of individuals and representing absolutely massive investments of community resources. The scale of these monuments speaks to the incredible power and status of the Sarmatian warrior elite. The warrior aristocracy was organized around extended kinship groups that controlled specific territories and maintained hereditary rights to seasonal grazing grounds, river crossings, and trade route access points. Each aristocratic lineage maintained its own tamga or property mark, which was carved or branded onto livestock, weapons, and personal possessions to indicate ownership and clan affiliation. But here comes the most extraordinary aspect of Sarmatian civilization: the prominent role accorded to aristocratic women, who enjoyed legal and social status that was absolutely unprecedented among contemporary Indo-European societies. Female members of the warrior aristocracy could own property independently, lead military expeditions, and exercise political authority over subordinate clan groups. This was revolutionary for the ancient world. The archaeological evidence for high-status women is absolutely mind-blowing. Richly furnished female burials contain weapons, armor, and symbols of authority typically associated with male warriors in other cultures. The famous burial of the Amazon warrior from Pokrovka demonstrates the military role of aristocratic Sarmatian women perfectly. This 2nd century BC grave contained a female aged approximately 25 to 30 years, who was buried with a complete set of scale armor, an iron sword, a bow with bronze-tipped arrows, and a ceremonial bronze mirror decorated with scenes of mounted combat. Osteological analysis revealed healed fractures on the left forearm and shoulder, consistent with combat injuries, while isotope analysis of tooth enamel indicated a childhood spent in the eastern Sarmatian territories, followed by adult residence in the western regions, suggesting participation in long-distance military campaigns. What's absolutely incredible is that female warriors weren't exceptional cases, but represented a systematic integration of women into Sarmatian military culture. Excavations at the Filipovka cemetery have revealed that approximately 20% of weapon-bearing burials contain female remains, with ages ranging from adolescence to middle age. These female warriors were equipped with exactly the same weapon types as their male counterparts, including the distinctive Sarmatian longsword, composite bows, and iron-tipped lances. The presence of horse burials alongside armed women indicates that they participated in mounted warfare as full members of cavalry formations rather than serving auxiliary roles. This archaeological evidence corresponds perfectly with classical literary sources that describe Sarmatian women's participation in warfare. Pseudo-Silax noted that Sarmatian women ride horses and use bows and javelins from horseback, and fight their enemies as long as they are virgins. Hippocrates provided even more detailed observations, stating that Sarmatian women ride, shoot with the bow, and hurl javelins from horseback, and they fight their enemies as long as they remain unmarried. The integration of women into military activities reflected broader patterns of gender complementarity within Sarmatian society that extended far beyond warfare into economic and religious spheres. Women controlled specific aspects of pastoral production, particularly the processing of dairy products and the weaving of textiles that were essential for both domestic use and trade. The religious authority of Sarmatian women is evidenced by their prominent role in burial rituals and their association with specific cult objects. Female graves often contain bronze mirrors with complex iconographic programs that appear to represent cosmological beliefs and mythological narratives. The mirror from the Prokhorovka cemetery depicts a central female figure surrounded by animals and geometric patterns that may represent seasonal cycles or astronomical phenomena. What's remarkable is that similar mirrors have been found across Sarmatian territories, suggesting the existence of shared religious practices centered on female religious specialists. This shows us a society where women held not just military and economic power, but spiritual authority as well. Beneath the warrior aristocracy, Sarmatian society included several distinct social strata that reflected both economic specialization and ethnic diversity within the confederations, creating a complex, sophisticated civilization that would influence the development of societies across Eurasia for centuries to come. This incredible story of the Sarmatians shows us how environmental pressures, military innovation, and social adaptation combined to create one of history's most remarkable civilizations, one that challenged every assumption about ancient nomadic societies and left an indelible mark on the ancient world. Now let's dive deeper into this fascinating social structure, because what we discover about the rest of Sarmatian society is equally incredible. Freeherders constituted the majority of the population and were organized into extended family groups that maintained their own livestock herds while acknowledging the political authority of aristocratic clans. These families weren't poor by any means. They typically owned between 50 to 200 animals, primarily sheep and goats with smaller numbers of horses and cattle. This provided sufficient resources for economic independence, while contributing tribute and military service to their aristocratic patrons. It was a sophisticated system that balanced freedom with loyalty. Archaeological evidence for freeherder families comes from smaller burial mounds that contain modest grave goods, but still demonstrate participation in broader Sarmatian cultural traditions. These burials typically include locally produced pottery, iron tools, bronze ornaments, and occasionally single horses or partial horse burials. What's remarkable is the consistency of burial practices across different social levels, indicating the existence of shared cultural values and religious beliefs that transcended economic distinctions. Specialized craftsmen occupied a distinct and respected position within Sarmatian society, producing the sophisticated metalwork, textiles, and decorative objects that characterized elite material culture. Archaeological evidence suggests that skilled craftsmen were often attached to aristocratic households where they produced weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial objects for their patrons while maintaining personal freedom and economic independence. The workshop areas identified at sites such as Tanais reveal specialized facilities for metalworking that are absolutely mind-blowing, including furnaces capable of achieving the high temperatures required for steel production and sophisticated tools for creating the intricate decorative elements that adorned Sarmatian weapons and ornaments. The lowest stratum of Sarmatian society consisted of various dependent populations that included war captives, debt slaves, and members of conquered ethnic groups who had been incorporated into Sarmatian political structures. These individuals typically worked as herders for aristocratic families, tending large flocks of sheep and goats in remote grazing areas. But what's truly fascinating is how Sarmatian religious beliefs represented a complex synthesis of inherited Indo-Iranian traditions, with elements borrowed from Greek, Thracian, and Caucasian cultures encountered during their westward expansion. The core of Sarmatian religious practice centered on the worship of fire as a sacred element that connected the earthly and divine realms. Archaeological evidence for fire worship includes specialized bronze and iron fire altars found in elite burials and settlement contexts, as well as the widespread practice of cremation for certain categories of deceased individuals. Fire altars from Sarmatian sites typically consist of portable bronze vessels with perforated bases that allowed air circulation to maintain sacred flames. The most elaborate examples, such as those found in the Novocherkassk treasure, feature complex decorative programs that include animal motifs, geometric patterns, and human figures that may represent deities or mythological scenes. The portability of these altars perfectly reflects the nomadic lifestyle of Sarmatian communities, allowing them to maintain continuous religious observances during seasonal migrations. Here's something that perfectly captures their warrior identity. The worship of swords as sacred objects represented another distinctive aspect of Sarmatian religious practice. Classical sources describe Sarmatian sword cults in which iron weapons were erected as standing stones and worshipped as manifestations of a war deity. Archaeological evidence for sword worship includes the discovery of iron swords deliberately planted point first in the ground at cemetery sites, often surrounded by offerings of animal bones and pottery vessels. The symbolic importance of swords in Sarmatian culture extended far beyond religious practices into social and political spheres. The distinctive Sarmatian longsword, measuring between 90 to 110 centimeters in length, served as both a practical weapon and a symbol of aristocratic status. These swords were often decorated with gold and silver inlays that depicted animal motifs, geometric patterns, and occasionally human figures. Metallurgical analysis reveals sophisticated forging techniques that produced flexible blades capable of withstanding the stresses of mounted combat, while maintaining razor-sharp cutting edges. Ancestor veneration constituted a fundamental aspect of Sarmatian religious practice that linked individual families to broader clan structures and territorial claims. The construction of elaborate burial mounds served not only as tombs for deceased family members, but as permanent markers of clan territory and focal points for ongoing religious observances. Archaeological evidence indicates that Sarmatian communities regularly return to ancestral burial sites to conduct rituals, make offerings, and reaffirm kinship bonds that extended across generations. This created an enduring connection between the living and the dead that shaped their entire worldview. The Kurgan burial tradition reached its most sophisticated expression during the height of Sarmatian power in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. The largest Sarmatian kurgans, such as the Kokak Barrow near Novocherkassk, required the movement of over 7,000 cubic meters of earth and the construction of complex wooden burial chambers designed to preserve the deceased and their grave goods for eternity. These monumental constructions served as visible symbols of aristocratic power while creating sacred landscapes that reinforced clan identity and territorial claims. The scale of these monuments speaks to the incredible organizational capabilities of Sarmatian society. The syncretic nature of Sarmatian religious beliefs is evident in their adoption and adaptation of Greek deities and mythological concepts encountered through contact with Black Sea colonies. Archaeological evidence from sites near Greek cities reveals Sarmatian interpretations of Greek religious iconography, with local craftsmen creating objects that combine traditional Sarmatian animal motifs with Greek mythological figures. The bronze plaque from the Gaimanova Mogila Kurgan depicts a female figure that combines attributes of the Greek goddess Demeter with traditional Sarmatian fertility symbols, suggesting the development of hybrid religious concepts that bridged cultural boundaries. Roman influence on Sarmatian religious practices became increasingly evident during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, as diplomatic contacts and military alliances brought Sarmatian elites into direct contact with Roman officials and religious practices. Archaeological evidence includes the adoption of Roman military insignia and religious symbols, particularly among Sarmatian auxiliary units serving in the Roman army. The religious syncretism evident in these contexts suggests that Sarmatian communities were incredibly selective in their adoption of foreign religious elements, incorporating new deities and practices that complemented existing beliefs while maintaining core elements of traditional religious identity. Finally, the material culture of Sarmatian society reflected both their nomadic lifestyle and their position at the center of extensive trade networks that connected the Mediterranean world with Central Asian and Chinese markets. This created a civilization that was simultaneously mobile and cosmopolitan, traditional and innovative. The story of the Sarmatians shows us how a nomadic people could create a sophisticated, complex civilization that influenced the development of Europe, Asia, and the Mediterranean world for over 6 centuries. Their legacy of military innovation, social equality, and cultural adaptation continues to fascinate archaeologists and historians today, revealing new insights into one of history's most remarkable civilizations. Now let's explore something absolutely fascinating about Sarmatian culture, their incredible craftsmanship that set them apart from every other civilization of their time. Sarmatian pottery traditions developed distinctive characteristics that completely distinguish them from both their Scythian predecessors and contemporary cultures across the region. What makes their pottery so remarkable is that they created hand-built vessels using carefully controlled firing techniques that produced incredibly hard, durable ceramics perfectly suited for nomadic life. We're talking about pottery that could withstand the constant movement and harsh conditions of steppe living while maintaining both functionality and beauty. The most common Sarmatian pottery forms included large storage jars specifically designed for fermented mare's milk, cooking pots with rounded bottoms that could be easily nested for transport, and drinking cups with distinctive rim profiles that served both ceremonial and practical functions. The genius of this design was in how everything could be efficiently packed and transported during seasonal migrations. The surface treatments of Sarmatian pottery often featured geometric patterns created through cord marking, stamping, or incision, with some vessels featuring elaborate decorative programs that incorporated animal motifs or abstract designs. This wasn't just functional pottery, mates. This was art that traveled with them across thousands of miles. But where Sarmatian craftsmanship truly reached extraordinary heights was in their metalwork traditions, which achieved remarkable sophistication in both practical and decorative applications. The production of iron weapons required advanced smelting techniques and specialized knowledge of heat treatment processes that could create steel blades with optimal combinations of hardness and flexibility. Archaeological analysis of Sarmatian weapons reveals something absolutely mind-blowing. The use of pattern welding techniques that created distinctive surface patterns while enhancing blade performance, as well as sophisticated methods for creating composite armor systems that combined iron scales with organic backing materials. This was cutting-edge military technology for the ancient world. The jewelry traditions of Sarmatian craftsmen developed the distinctive polychrome style that would later influence barbarian artistic traditions across all of Europe. This style featured the extensive use of garnet inlays, colored glass, and gold filigree work to create complex decorative effects that emphasized color contrast and surface texture. The technical skills required to create polychrome jewelry were absolutely incredible. For modern craftsmen needed the ability to cut and shape semi-precious stones, create precise settings that held inlays securely, and work gold into intricate patterns that perfectly complemented the colored elements. The famous Nova Cherkask diadem exemplifies the sophistication of Sarmatian polychrome work, featuring a gold framework set with garnets, colored glass, and pearls arranged in complex geometric and animal motifs. Technical analysis of this masterpiece reveals the use of advanced gold-working techniques, including granulation, filigree, and repoussé work, as well as sophisticated lapidary skills in cutting and setting stone elements. What's fascinating is how the iconographic program of the diadem combines traditional Sarmatian animal motifs with elements that may derive from Persian or Central Asian artistic traditions, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of elite Sarmatian material culture. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn. Monarch expansion of Sarmatian power across the Pontic steppes inevitably brought these nomadic confederations into direct contact with the Greek colonial cities that had flourished along the Black Sea coast for over 4 centuries. The initial encounters between Sarmatians and Greeks occurred in the late 3rd century BC, when Sarmatian warbands first appeared in the territories surrounding the major trading center of Tanais at the mouth of the Don River. Archaeological evidence from the site reveals a gradual transformation in material culture during this period, with traditional Greek pottery and architectural elements increasingly supplemented by Sarmatian-produced goods and burial practices that reflected the growing influence of steppe peoples. Tanais, established around 275 BC as a colony of the Bosporan Kingdom, occupied a strategically crucial position at the intersection of river and maritime trade routes. The city served as the primary conduit for Greek-manufactured goods flowing into steppe regions, while facilitating the export of grain, livestock products, and luxury items from Sarmatian territories to Mediterranean markets. The earliest evidence of Sarmatian presence at Tanais comes from burial contexts dating to approximately 250 BC, where individuals with distinctly Sarmatian grave goods were interred using Greek burial practices, suggesting the beginning of cultural accommodation between these two very different populations. What's remarkable is how the relationship between Tanais and the surrounding Sarmatian communities developed along pragmatic lines that benefited both parties. Greek merchants gained access to vast quantities of agricultural products from the fertile river valleys now controlled by Sarmatian confederations, while Sarmatian elites acquired manufactured goods, luxury items, and technical expertise that enhanced their status and military capabilities. Excavations in the residential quarters of Tanais have revealed workshops where Greek craftsmen produced weapons and decorative objects, specifically designed to meet Sarmatian preferences, including the distinctive polychrome jewelry that became characteristic of steppe elite culture. The gradual integration of Sarmatian elements into Tanais society proceeded through several mechanisms that avoided direct confrontation while allowing for mutual accommodation. Intermarriage between Greek colonists and Sarmatian aristocrats created kinship networks that facilitated trade relationships and provided security guarantees for commercial activities. Archaeological evidence from family burial plots shows the development of hybrid burial practices that combined Greek architectural elements with Sarmatian grave goods and ritual practices, indicating the emergence of a genuinely mixed cultural community. The economic relationship between Tanais and the Sarmatians evolved beyond simple trade exchange to include more sophisticated arrangements that reflected the military realities of the region. Sarmatian confederations provided military protection for Greek trading expeditions venturing into the interior, while Greek technical expertise enhanced Sarmatian agricultural productivity and craft production. Chersonosos, located on the southwestern coast of the Crimean Peninsula, developed a completely different pattern of interaction with Sarmatian confederations that reflected its greater distance from the main centers of nomadic power. The city maintained its independence through a brilliant combination of defensive fortifications, diplomatic alliances with multiple Sarmatian groups, and the provision of manufactured goods that were essential for maintaining steppe political hierarchies. Archaeological evidence from Chersonesos reveals extensive production facilities for bronze and iron objects designed specifically for export to Sarmatian markets, including weapons, horse harness fittings, and decorative elements for elite clothing and equipment. The defensive preparations undertaken by Chersonesos during the 2nd century BC demonstrate the city's acute awareness of the military threat posed by Sarmatian expansion. The construction of additional wall circuits and the strengthening of existing fortifications required massive investments of resources and labor, indicating that the Greek population viewed Sarmatian military capabilities with considerable respect. These defensive walls incorporated innovative design elements that combined traditional Greek masonry techniques with adaptations specifically designed to counter steppe siege tactics, including provisions for cavalry sorties and storage of supplies sufficient for extended sieges. The diplomatic strategies employed by Chersonesos involved brilliantly playing different Sarmatian confederations against each other, while maintaining trade relationships with all major groups. Inscriptional evidence from the city reveals the existence of formal treaties with individual Sarmatian leaders that guaranteed safe passage for merchants in exchange for tribute payments and the provision of specific manufactured goods. This complex web of relationships shows us how the Sarmatians weren't just conquerors même day. They were sophisticated diplomatic and economic partners who fundamentally transformed the cultural landscape of the ancient Black Sea world through both conflict and cooperation. These agreements were typically renewed on an annual basis, reflecting the incredibly fluid nature of steppe political arrangements and the need for constant diplomatic attention to maintain peaceful relationships. But the most fascinating and complex arena of Sarmatian-Greek interaction was the Bosporan Kingdom, where the stakes were highest and the relationships most intricate. The Bosporan Kingdom represented something unprecedented and Mishtaver, the realm where Greek colonial cities and extensive agricultural regions were increasingly dominated by Sarmatian populations. The Bosporan rulers faced an almost impossible challenge, maintaining political control over diverse populations while adapting to the changing military and economic realities created by Sarmatian expansion. Archaeological evidence from the Bosporan capital of Pantikapaeum reveals significant changes in urban planning and defensive arrangements during the 2nd century BC. The city was simultaneously fortified against potential Sarmatian attacks, while accommodating increasing numbers of steppe peoples within its population. This delicate balancing act would define the kingdom's survival strategy. Here's where the story takes an incredible turn. The Pseudorites' integration of Sarmatians into Bosporan military structures began as early as 200 BC, when Sarmatian cavalry units were first employed as auxiliary forces to supplement the kingdom's traditional Greek hoplite formations. These early arrangements involved hiring Sarmatian warbands for specific campaigns, with payment provided in manufactured goods, precious metals, and access to urban markets. But the effectiveness of Sarmatian heavy cavalry in regional conflicts led to increasingly permanent arrangements, with entire Sarmatian clans receiving grants of land within Bosporan territory in exchange for military service obligations. The transformation of Sarmatian auxiliary forces into foederati represented a fundamental shift in the political structure of the Bosporan kingdom. Unlike simple mercenary arrangements, foederati agreements created permanent alliances between Sarmatian confederations and the Bosporan state that involved mutual defense obligations and shared political authority over specific territories. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Myrmikion and Nymphium shows the establishment of mixed communities where Sarmatian and Greek populations lived in close proximity while maintaining distinct cultural practices and social organization. This was cultural integration on a scale rarely seen in the ancient world. The military effectiveness of Sarmatian foederati completely transformed Bosporan's strategic capabilities and allowed the kingdom to expand its territorial control during the 2nd century BC. Sarmatian heavy cavalry provided the kingdom with offensive capabilities that had been lacking in traditional Greek military formations, while Sarmatian knowledge of steppe warfare tactics enhanced the effectiveness of defensive operations against other nomadic groups. The combined Greek-Sarmatian forces proved particularly effective in conflicts with Scythian remnant populations and in campaigns against the emerging Pontic kingdom under Mithridates VI. This military partnership would reshape the balance of power across the entire Black Sea region. The political influence of Sarmatian leaders within the Bosporan kingdom increased gradually as their military importance grew and their economic contributions became essential for the kingdom's prosperity. By 150 BC, Sarmatian nobles were serving as advisors to Bosporan kings and participating in the administrative governance of territories with significant steppe populations. Inscriptional evidence reveals the existence of Sarmatian officials with Greek titles, indicating the development of hybrid administrative systems that combined elements of both political traditions. This was political innovation at its finest. The cultural exchange between Sarmatians and Greeks extended far beyond military and political arrangements to encompass artistic traditions, religious practices, and technological innovations. Sarmatian elites became enthusiastic consumers of Greek luxury goods, particularly decorated pottery, jewelry, and textiles that served as symbols of status and sophistication within steppe society. Archaeological evidence from elite Sarmatian burials shows extensive collections of Greek imports, including Attic red figure pottery, bronze vessels with elaborate relief decoration, and gold jewelry produced in Greek workshops specifically for barbarian clientele. The adoption of Greek artistic motifs by Sarmatian craftsmen created distinctive hybrid styles that combined traditional steppe animal art with classical Greek figural representations. Bronze plaques from the Gamanova Mogila Kurgan demonstrate sophisticated metalworking techniques that incorporated Greek mythological figures into traditional Sarmatian decorative programs. Greek coinage systems were gradually adopted by Sarmatian confederations as their involvement in Mediterranean trade networks increased. The earliest Sarmatian coins, dating to approximately 180 BC, were crude imitations of Bosporan issues that retained Greek iconographic elements while incorporating Sarmatian symbols and inscriptions in Greek letters. The religious syncretism that developed through Greek-Sarmatian contact created new cult practices that combined elements of both traditions while maintaining distinct cultural identities. Greek deities were identified with traditional Sarmatian divine figures, creating hybrid religious concepts that appeal to mixed populations in border regions. But not all interactions were peaceful. The military campaigns launched by Sarmatian confederations against Greek territories represented the most dramatic aspect of their relationship, demonstrating both the military capabilities of steppe forces and the limitations of Greek defensive strategies. The first major Sarmatian raid against Greek settlements occurred in 179 BC, when Roxolani forces attacked agricultural territories belonging to Chersonesos, destroying several rural settlements and capturing significant numbers of livestock and captives. The raid demonstrated the vulnerability of Greek agricultural communities to steppe warfare tactics and forced a complete reassessment of defensive strategies throughout the region. The Sarmatian siege of Olbia in 168 BC represented the most significant military confrontation between Greek and Sarmatian forces during this period. The city's location on the Bug River made it vulnerable to attack from the landward side, while its importance as a trading center made it an attractive target for Sarmatian war leaders seeking to control commercial networks. Archaeological evidence from Olbia shows extensive damage to residential quarters and public buildings consistent with siege warfare, including evidence of fire damage and the hasty burial of valuable objects by fleeing inhabitants. The scale of destruction tells the story of a city under desperate siege. The siege techniques employed by Sarmatian forces against Olbia demonstrated their brilliant adaptation of traditional steppe warfare methods to the challenges of attacking fortified positions. Rather than attempting direct assaults against the city's walls, Sarmatian forces established a blockade that prevented the arrival of supplies and reinforcements while conducting systematic raids against the surrounding agricultural territories. This strategy proved devastatingly effective, showing how the Sarmatians had evolved from simple raiders into sophisticated military strategists capable of conducting complex siege operations. The story of the Sarmatians represents one of history's most remarkable transformations, from nomadic herders on the vast steppes to the creators of a sophisticated civilization that dominated vast territories for over 6 centuries. Their innovations in warfare, their unique social structures that elevated women to unprecedented positions of power, their mastery of diplomacy and trade, and their ability to adapt and integrate diverse cultures while maintaining their own identity, made them one of the most influential peoples of the ancient world. From their humble origins in the Pontic-Caspian steppes to their complex relationships with Greek cities and eventual integration into the Roman world, the Sarmatians left an indelible mark on European, Asian, and Mediterranean history that continues to fascinate us today. The siege was maintained for an agonizing 8 months before the city's desperate defenders finally negotiated a surrender that included tribute payments and the provision of manufactured goods to the besieging forces. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a complete transformation of how warfare was conducted in the ancient world. The impact of Sarmatian military pressure on Greek colonial cities extended far beyond immediate damage to include fundamental changes in urban planning, defensive strategies, and economic relationships that would reshape the entire region forever. Cities throughout the Black Sea region invested heavily in fortification improvements, including the construction of additional wall circuits, the strengthening of gates and towers, and the creation of protected harbors that could accommodate defensive fleets. These defensive investments required massive expenditures that strained municipal finances while reducing resources available for commercial and cultural activities. The Greek world was literally reorganizing itself around the Sarmatian threat. The economic disruption caused by Sarmatian raids forced Greek cities to develop completely new strategies for maintaining commercial relationships while protecting their populations and resources. The establishment of fortified trading posts in neutral territories allowed merchants to conduct business with Sarmatian groups without exposing major urban centers to military risk. Archaeological evidence from sites such as the Elizavtovka settlement shows the development of specialized commercial facilities that combine defensive features with storage and workshop areas designed to serve both Greek and Sarmatian needs. This was economic innovation born from military necessity. The transformation of regional political structures during this period reflected the growing dominance of Sarmatian military power and the adaptation of Greek institutional frameworks to accommodate steppe political realities. The traditional Greek polis system, based on citizen participation and urban-centered governance, proved completely inadequate for managing territories that included significant nomadic populations with entirely different political traditions and economic practices. The development of hybrid governmental systems that combined Greek administrative expertise with Sarmatian military leadership created new forms of political organization that would influence regional development for centuries to come. But the long-term consequences of Greek-Sarmatian interaction extended far beyond immediate military and political conflicts, to include fundamental changes in cultural identity, economic organization, and social structure throughout the entire Black Sea region. The integration of Sarmatian populations into Greek colonial societies created new ethnic identities that combined elements of both traditions while maintaining distinct characteristics that reflected local conditions and historical experiences. Archaeological evidence from mixed communities shows the development of material culture traditions that cannot be classified as purely Greek or Sarmatian, but represent genuine cultural synthesis that emerged from sustained interaction between different populations. Now comes the most dramatic chapter in the entire Sarmatian story, their collision with the mighty Roman Empire. The confrontation between Roman imperial expansion and Sarmatian territorial ambitions along the Danube frontier marked a fundamental shift in the geopolitical landscape of southeastern Europe that would echo through history. The first documented contact between Roman forces and Sarmatian confederations occurred during Augustus's Pannonian campaigns of 1290 BC, when Roman legionaries encountered Iazyges cavalry units operating as allies of the Dacian king Burebista. These initial encounters revealed the absolutely formidable military capabilities of Sarmatian heavy cavalry, while demonstrating the strategic importance of the Danube River as both a natural boundary and a fiercely contested zone of influence between expanding imperial powers. The Roman military's first systematic assessment of Sarmatian warfare capabilities came through intelligence reports compiled during Tiberius's campaigns along the Middle Danube between 6 AD, Roman observers noted the distinctive tactical formations employed by Sarmatian cataphracts, describing their coordinated charge attacks as capable of breaking through traditional legionary formations when deployed on favorable terrain. The reports emphasized the superior quality of Sarmatian horses, bred specifically for carrying heavily armored warriors, and the sophisticated metallurgical techniques that produced their distinctive scale armor and long lances. The Romans had never encountered anything quite like this before. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites along the Danube frontier reveals extensive preparations for defending against Sarmatian cavalry attacks. The fortress at Carnuntum, established around 15 AD, incorporated defensive features specifically designed to counter mounted warfare, including wider ditches filled with sharpened stakes, reinforced gates capable of withstanding cavalry charges, and elevated platforms that provided Roman archers with clear fields of fire against approaching horsemen. The construction techniques employed at these frontier fortifications represented significant innovations in Roman military engineering, adapting traditional designs to address the unique challenges posed by steppe warfare tactics. The strategic importance of the Danube frontier became increasingly apparent as Roman administrators recognized the river's role as both a natural barrier and a crucial transportation route connecting the Black Sea with Central European territories. The establishment of the Danubian fleet under Tiberius created new capabilities for projecting Roman power into Sarmatian territories while providing logistical support for land-based operations. But theory would soon meet brutal reality. The first major military confrontation between Roman and Sarmatian forces occurred in 69 AD during the civil war following Nero's death, when 9,000 Roxolani cavalry crossed the frozen Danube to raid Mosian territories. This wasn't just a raid maze, this was an invasion force that would test everything the Romans thought they knew about warfare. The Roxolani force, led by a nobleman named Dorpaneus, consisted primarily of heavily armoured cataphracts equipped with the traditional contus lance, and supported by lighter cavalry units armed with composite bows. The timing of the invasion brilliantly took advantage of Roman political instability and the temporary withdrawal of regular legionary units from frontier positions to participate in the succession struggles. The Roxolani invasion force moved with lightning speed through the Mosian plains, avoiding Roman fortified positions while systematically plundering rural settlements and capturing livestock and captives. Roman sources describe the devastating effectiveness of Sarmatian cavalry charges against unprepared civilian populations, with entire villages abandoned as inhabitants fled toward fortified cities. The psychological impact of the raids extended far beyond the immediate damage as reports of Sarmatian military prowess spread throughout the Danubian provinces and influenced Roman strategic planning for decades to come. The Roman response to the Roxolani invasion demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of traditional legionary tactics when confronting steppe warfare. The 3rd Gallica Legion, stationed at Uscus under the command of Marcus Aponius Saturninus, attempted to intercept the Sarmatian force using conventional pursuit tactics that proved completely inadequate against highly mobile cavalry formations. The initial Roman advance was conducted in standard marching formation with heavy infantry in the center, flanked by auxiliary cavalry units that were significantly outnumbered and outclassed by their Sarmatian counterparts. The decisive engagement occurred near the modern city of Adamclisi, where the Roman force succeeded in forcing a battle by threatening the Sarmatian withdrawal route across the Danube. What happened next would become legendary Mine Sun, a clash between two of history's most formidable military systems that would determine the fate of southeastern Europe for generations to come. This incredible story of the Sarmatians from their humble origins on the steppes to their epic confrontations with the Roman Empire shows us how a nomadic people could rise to challenge the greatest powers of the ancient world through innovation, adaptation, and sheer determination. Their legacy continues to influence our understanding of ancient warfare, social organization, and cultural exchange, revealing new insights into one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The tactical details preserved in Tacitus' gripping account reveal the incredible challenges faced by Roman commanders when confronting cataphract formations on open terrain that was absolutely perfect for cavalry operations. This wasn't just another battle mecule, this was a clash between two completely different military philosophies that would determine the future of southeastern Europe. The Roxolani deployed in their devastating traditional wedge formations with the heaviest armored warriors at the front, supported by successive ranks of lighter cavalry that could exploit breakthroughs or provide covering fire during withdrawal. Picture this minus thousands of heavily armored horsemen thundering across the battlefield in perfect formation, their long lances glinting in the sunlight, creating one of the most terrifying sights any Roman soldier had ever witnessed. The Roman tactical response involved the use of concentrated javelin volleys from legionary ranks, aimed at disrupting Sarmatian charge formations before they could achieve decisive impact. This was desperation tactics at their finest. Many Roman commanders knew they had only one chance to break these charges before their lines would be shattered. Archaeological evidence from the battlefield site tells an incredible story through numerous iron pillar heads and Sarmatian-scale armor fragments that demonstrate the devastating effectiveness of Roman missile weapons against even heavily protected cavalry. The legionaries' disciplined formations and superior numbers ultimately prevailed, but only after sustaining significant casualties that starkly highlighted the vulnerability of traditional infantry tactics to mounted warfare. The aftermath of the 69 AD battle revealed crucial lessons about Sarmatian military capabilities and limitations that would fundamentally influence subsequent Roman strategic planning. Captured Sarmatian equipment provided Roman military engineers with detailed knowledge of steppe armor and weapon technologies, leading to revolutionary improvements in Roman cavalry equipment and the development of specialized anti-cavalry tactics. The interrogation of prisoners revealed invaluable information about Sarmatian political organization, seasonal migration patterns, and the internal disputes that could be exploited to prevent future coordinated attacks. This intelligence would prove absolutely vital in future conflicts. The period of relative peace following the Roxolani defeat allowed for diplomatic initiatives that established formal relationships between Roman provincial authorities and Sarmatian tribal leaders. The treaty negotiated in 70 AD between Governor Plautius Silvanus and the Roxolani king Pharasmanes created a framework for managing frontier relations that included provisions for trade, the return of captives, and the establishment of buffer zones where neither power would maintain permanent military installations. Archaeological evidence from trading posts established along the Danube during this period shows the rapid development of commercial relationships that benefited both Roman merchants and Sarmatian elites. For a brief moment, it seemed like peace might prevail. But that peace wouldn't last. The resumption of large-scale Sarmatian raids during Domitian's reign reflected both internal pressures within Sarmatian confederations and changing strategic circumstances along the Danube frontier. The Roxolani invasion of 85 AD involved significantly larger forces than any previous raids, with Roman sources estimating the attacking army at over 15,000 cavalry, supported by allied infantry from Dacian and Germanic tribes. The scale of this invasion suggested coordination between multiple Sarmatian confederations and represented the most serious challenge to Roman territorial control in the Danubian provinces since the region's conquest. This wasn't just a raid miss, this was an invasion designed to permanently alter the balance of power. The 85 AD invasion followed a completely different strategic pattern from earlier raids, with Sarmatian forces attempting to establish permanent footholds in Roman territory, rather than conducting hit-and-run attacks. Archaeological evidence from sites in Moesia reveals the construction of temporary fortifications using traditional Sarmatian earth and timber techniques, indicating plans for extended occupation of conquered territories. The Roman response to the 85 AD invasion involved the deployment of multiple legions under the personal command of Domitian himself, representing the largest military commitment to Danubian operations since the initial conquest of the region. The 1st Minervia and 2nd Adiutrix legions were transferred from Rhine frontier positions, while the 5th Macedonica was redeployed from Egyptian garrisons to provide additional heavy infantry capabilities. The concentration of these forces required extensive logistical preparations, including the construction of new supply depots and the expansion of existing road networks to support rapid troop movements. Rome was pulling out all the stops to deal with this unprecedented threat. The tactical innovations employed by Roman forces during the 85-86 AD campaigns reflected hard-learned lessons from previous encounters with Sarmatian cavalry, The development of mixed formations that integrated legionary infantry with increased numbers of auxiliary cavalry created more flexible tactical options for confronting mobile enemies. Archaeological evidence from military equipment deposits shows the introduction of longer spears and improved shield designs specifically intended to counter cavalry charges, while changes in auxiliary cavalry equipment demonstrate the adoption of some Sarmatian techniques and weapons. The Romans were literally adapting Sarmatian innovations to use against them. The siege of the Sarmatian fortified camp at Tepe represented a significant departure from traditional steppe warfare patterns and demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of Sarmatian military leaders to changing tactical circumstances. The fortification combined traditional earthwork techniques with innovations borrowed from Roman military engineering, including the use of sharpened stakes, overlapping defensive ditches, and elevated platforms for mounted archers. The siege lasted for several brutal weeks and required Roman forces to develop entirely new techniques for attacking positions defended by cavalry-based armies. The outcome of the Tepe siege established important precedents for future Roman-Sarmatian conflicts, while revealing the limitations of both military systems when operating outside their optimal tactical environments. Roman siege techniques proved effective against Sarmatian fortifications, but the extended duration of the operation allowed other Sarmatian confederations to organize relief expeditions that complicated Roman strategic planning. The eventual Roman victory came at considerable cost and demonstrated that successful operations against Sarmatian forces required careful preparation and massive resource commitments. Now comes the ultimate chapter in this epic saga, the involvement of Sarmatian confederations in the Dacian Wars of 101, 102, and 105, 106 AD, mark the absolute culmination of their military confrontation with Roman expansion in southeastern Europe. The alliance between the Dacian king Decebalus and various Sarmatian leaders created a formidable coalition that combined Dacian knowledge of mountain warfare with Sarmatian cavalry expertise. Archaeological evidence from Dacian fortified sites reveals the presence of Sarmatian military equipment and burial practices, indicating the deployment of significant Sarmatian forces in support of Dacian resistance to Roman conquest. The strategic coordination between Dacian and Sarmatian forces represented a sophisticated understanding of combined arms tactics that maximized the effectiveness of different military specializations. Dacian infantry provided the defensive capabilities necessary for holding fortified positions, while Sarmatian cavalry conducted reconnaissance, harassment operations, and rapid response to Roman tactical movements. The integration of these different military traditions required extensive planning and communication systems that demonstrate the incredible political and military sophistication of the anti-Roman coalition. The role of Sarmatian heavy cavalry in the major battles of the Dacian Wars provided Roman military observers with extensive opportunities to study steppe warfare tactics under various conditions. The Battle of Adam Clissi in 102 AD featured the largest deployment of Sarmatian cataphracts in a single engagement, with an estimated 5,000 heavily armoured cavalry participating in coordinated charge attacks against Roman formations. This massive cavalry charge would have been one of the most spectacular and terrifying sights in ancient military history. Thousands of heavily armoured horsemen thundering across the battlefield in perfect coordination, their long lances creating a wall of death that would have struck fear into the hearts of even veteran Roman legionaries. The story of the Sarmatians represents one of history's most remarkable civilizations, from their origins on the steppes to their revolutionary military innovations. From their unique social structures that elevated women to positions of unprecedented power to their epic confrontations with the mighty Roman Empire. Their legacy of adaptation, innovation, and cultural synthesis continues to fascinate us today, showing how a nomadic people could rise to challenge the greatest powers of the ancient world and leave an indelible mark on history that resonates even now. The tactical details preserved in Trajan's column and contemporary literary sources reveal something absolutely mind-blowing about Sarmatian shock tactics. When properly supported by infantry formations and employed on suitable terrain, they were virtually unstoppable. The defeat of the Dacian-Sarmatian coalition required Roman forces to completely revolutionize their approach, developing new tactical methods that could effectively counter the combined threat posed by mountain infantry and steppe cavalry. The Roman solution was brilliant in its simplicity, pented operations that isolated different enemy forces and prevented effective coordination between Dacian and Sarmatian units. Roman engineering capabilities proved absolutely crucial in this strategy, as the construction of fortified lines and supply roads allowed Roman forces to control key terrain features while maintaining logistical support for extended operations. But here's what's truly remarkable. The aftermath of the Dacian Wars fundamentally altered the strategic balance along the Danube frontier and created entirely new opportunities for diplomatic solutions to Roman-Sarmatian conflicts. The elimination of Dacian political independence removed a crucial ally for Sarmatian military operations while establishing Roman territorial control over strategic river crossings and mountain passes. The incorporation of Dacian territories into the Roman provincial system created buffer zones that reduced direct contact between Roman settlements and Sarmatian tribal territories. This geographic separation would prove crucial for what happened next. Enter Emperor Hadrian, their leader, whose approach to Sarmatian relations represented a fundamental shift from military confrontation to diplomatic accommodation that recognized the impracticality of conquering the vast steppe territories controlled by nomadic confederations. This was strategic genius at work. The diplomatic initiatives launched during Hadrian's visit to the Danube frontier in 124 AD established formal treaty relationships with major Sarmatian leaders that provided security guarantees in exchange for Roman recognition of Sarmatian territorial claims and the provision of annual subsidies in manufactured goods and precious metals. The client relationship established between Rome and the Roxolani Confederation under King Rasparaganus created a model for managing relations with other Sarmatian groups that perfectly balanced Roman strategic interests with respect for nomadic political autonomy. The treaty provisions included mutual defense agreements that obligated Sarmatian forces to assist Roman operations against common enemies, while guaranteeing Roman support for legitimate Sarmatian territorial claims. Archaeological evidence from trading posts established under these agreements shows the rapid expansion of commercial relationships that provided massive economic benefits for both parties. This was diplomacy backed by mutual prosperity. The transformation of former enemies into allied foederati represented one of the most successful aspects of Hadrianic frontier policy and demonstrated the incredible effectiveness of diplomatic solutions when supported by adequate military deterrence. Sarmatian auxiliary units began serving in Roman armies as early as 125 AD, providing valuable cavalry capabilities for operations in other frontier regions while creating personal relationships between Sarmatian nobles and Roman military commanders. The integration of Sarmatian military traditions into Roman tactical doctrine enhanced the effectiveness of Roman cavalry operations and provided models for managing relationships with other nomadic peoples along the imperial frontiers. This wasn't just military cooperation mission, this was cultural fusion on an unprecedented scale. What happened next represents one of the most remarkable examples of barbarian integration in imperial history. The transformation of Sarmatian confederations from frontier adversaries to integral components of the Roman military system began during Hadrian's systematic reorganization of Danubian frontier defenses in the 120s AD, when Roman military planners recognized that Sarmatian heavy cavalry could provide capabilities that complemented rather than threatened imperial strategic objectives. The first formal recruitment agreements were negotiated with Roxolani and Aeziges leaders in 124 AD, establishing precedents for incorporating entire tribal units into Roman auxiliary forces while maintaining their traditional command structures and tactical methods. This was integration without assimilation, preserving what made them effective while channeling it toward Roman goals. The initial deployment of Sarmatian auxiliary units occurred along the Rhine frontier, where their mobility and shock capabilities proved invaluable for operations against Germanic tribes that had previously proven difficult for conventional Roman forces to engage effectively. Archaeological evidence from military sites at Mainz and Bonn reveals the construction of specialized facilities for housing Sarmatian cavalry units, including enlarged stables designed to accommodate the larger horses bred for cataphract warfare and workshops for maintaining the complex armor systems that distinguished Sarmatian military equipment. The adaptation of Sarmatian military units to Roman organizational structures required careful negotiation between imperial administrators and tribal leaders to preserve essential elements of steppe warrior culture while ensuring effective integration into Roman tactical doctrine. Sarmatian auxiliary units maintained their traditional decimal organization based on units of 10, 50, and 100 warriors, but were grouped into larger formations that corresponded to Roman cohort structures. Now here's where this story becomes absolutely incredible. Hence the deployment of Sarmatian auxiliary units across the Roman Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange and technological transfer between steppe peoples and Mediterranean civilizations. Units of Roxolani cavalry served in Britain from 130 AD onward, participating in campaigns against Caledonian tribes and contributing to the construction of Hadrian's Wall through their knowledge of earthwork fortification techniques, adapted from steppe warfare traditions. Archaeological evidence from military sites at Halsteads and Burdoswald includes horse equipment and personal ornaments that demonstrate the maintenance of Sarmatian cultural identity within Roman military contexts. Picture this: Manetian warriors who had once challenged Rome's legions were now defending Hadrian's Wall against Scottish tribes, bringing their centuries of steppe warfare experience to the misty hills of northern Britain. The presence of Sarmatian cavalry in Britain introduced new tactical capabilities that enhanced Roman operational effectiveness in the challenging terrain of northern England and southern Scotland. But the story doesn't end there. Sarmatian auxiliary units deployed to Syria and the eastern frontier brought their expertise in mounted archery and cavalry tactics to bear against Parthian forces that employed similar military methods derived from shared steppe traditions. The familiarity of Sarmatian warriors with the tactical approaches used by Parthian cataphracts provided Roman commanders with invaluable intelligence about enemy capabilities and weaknesses. Archaeological evidence from military sites at Dura Europos and Palmyra reveals the presence of Sarmatian equipment and burial practices, indicating the long-term deployment of these units in eastern frontier regions, where their specialized skills were particularly valuable. The story of the Sarmatians represents one of history's most extraordinary transformations, from nomadic herders on the vast steppes to creators of a sophisticated civilization that revolutionized warfare, challenged the mightiest empire in the world, and ultimately became integral partners in that empire's defense. Their innovations in military technology, their unique social structures that elevated women to unprecedented positions of power, their diplomatic sophistication, and their remarkable adaptability allowed them to not just survive but thrive across 6 centuries of dramatic change. From the windswept grasslands of their origins to the mists of northern Britain, from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germany, Sarmatian warriors carried their traditions across the known world while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Their legacy lives on in archaeological discoveries that continue to reveal new insights into one of antiquity's most remarkable peoples, and a civilization that proves how nomadic societies could achieve levels of sophistication and influence that rivaled the greatest settled empires of their age. The Sarmatians didn't just make history, they helped shape the very foundations of medieval Europe through their military innovations, cultural practices, and the genetic and cultural legacy they left across vast territories. Their story continues to fascinate archaeologists, historians, and anyone interested in how human societies adapt, evolve, and overcome seemingly impossible challenges to leave an indelible mark on the world. The service records preserved in military diplomas and inscriptions tell us something absolutely remarkable about Sarmatian auxiliary units. They maintained consistently high performance standards throughout their service in Roman armies. But what's even more incredible is what happened next. Veterans of Sarmatian units received Roman citizenship upon completion of their military obligations, creating an entirely new class of individuals who possessed both Roman legal status and intimate knowledge of steppe cultural traditions. These veterans often served as crucial intermediaries between Roman administrators and tribal communities, facilitating diplomatic negotiations and commercial relationships that benefited both parties. They were living bridges between two worlds, carrying the best of both cultures forward into the future. But the Romans had an even grander vision. The settlement programs initiated under Hadrian and expanded during the reigns of Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius represented systematic efforts to transform nomadic Sarmatian populations into sedentary agricultural communities within Roman territorial boundaries. This wasn't just military integration nears, this was complete societal transformation on a massive scale. The largest and most successful of these programs occurred in Pannonia, where the fertile plains between the Danube and Sava rivers provided ideal conditions for establishing mixed agricultural and pastoral communities. Archaeological surveys of rural settlements in the Srem region have identified over 200 sites with material culture that demonstrates the gradual transition from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles over the course of several generations. What makes this transformation absolutely fascinating is how carefully it was planned. Roman administrators recognized that abrupt transitions from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles would likely result in social disruption and economic hardship, leading to the development of gradual integration processes that allowed Sarmatian communities to maintain essential elements of their traditional economic activities while adopting agricultural practices. The settlement sites were strategically located near river valleys that provided both excellent grazing for livestock and arable land suitable for grain production. This wasn't random placement minus. This was sophisticated urban planning that respected both Roman administrative needs and Sarmatian cultural requirements. The architectural evidence from Sarmatian settlement sites in Pannonia reveals something truly unique: the development of distinctive building traditions that combined Roman construction techniques with design elements derived from nomadic housing traditions. The typical Sarmatian farmstead consisted of a rectangular timber-framed house with a sunken floor and central hearth, surrounded by outbuildings for livestock and storage that reflected the continued importance of animal husbandry in the community's economic life. The construction techniques employed locally available materials while incorporating Roman innovations such as tile roofing and hypauxed heating systems that dramatically improved living conditions during harsh winter months. This was cultural synthesis at its most practical and effective. The agricultural practices adopted by settled Sarmatian communities represented a brilliant synthesis of Mediterranean farming techniques, with steppe pastoral traditions that created productive and sustainable land use systems. Archaeological evidence from excavated settlements shows the cultivation of wheat, barley, and millet, alongside the maintenance of substantial livestock herds that included horses, cattle, sheep, and goats. The integration of crop production with animal husbandry allowed these communities to achieve economic diversification that reduced their vulnerability to environmental fluctuations while maintaining cultural connections to their nomadic heritage. This was adaptation without abandonment of their core identity. The social organization of settled Sarmatian communities preserved important elements of traditional kinship structures while adapting to the requirements of territorial residents and agricultural production. Extended family groups continued to function as primary economic units, but their activities were now focused on specific landholdings rather than seasonal migration routes. The leadership roles traditionally held by war chiefs evolved into positions that combined military responsibilities with agricultural management and representation in Roman administrative systems. This was political evolution in real time. The establishment of Sarmatian communities in Dacia followed different patterns that reflected the unique circumstances of that province's recent conquest and the presence of significant indigenous populations with their own agricultural traditions. The Sarmatian settlers in Dacia were primarily Roxolani groups that had been displaced by conflicts with other steppe confederations and sought Roman protection in exchange for military service and agricultural development of frontier regions. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Banata region shows the development of fortified agricultural settlements that combine defensive features with facilities for crop production and livestock management. The integration of Sarmatian settlers into existing Dacian communities created complex multicultural societies that preserved distinct ethnic identities while developing shared economic and social institutions. The material culture from mixed settlements shows the gradual adoption of Roman building techniques and pottery styles alongside the maintenance of traditional Sarmatian metalwork traditions and decorative arts. The linguistic evidence suggests that Sarmatian languages continued to be spoken within these communities while Latin gradually became the primary language for official and commercial transactions. The process of cultural assimilation among settled Sarmatian populations proceeded at different rates and in different ways depending on local circumstances and the degree of contact with Roman urban centers. Communities located near major cities such as Sirmium and Aquincum experienced more rapid adoption of Roman cultural practices, including the use of Latin inscriptions, Roman naming conventions, and participation in urban commercial networks. Archaeological evidence from cemetery sites shows the gradual transition from traditional Sarmatian burial practices to Roman-style inhumation, though many communities maintained hybrid practices that combined elements of both traditions. This was cultural evolution, not cultural replacement. The adoption of Roman religious practices by Sarmatian communities occurred alongside, rather than in replacement of traditional spiritual beliefs, creating syncretic religious systems that incorporated elements from multiple cultural traditions. Archaeological evidence from religious sites shows the construction of temples dedicated to Roman deities such as Jupiter and Mars, but with architectural features and ritual practices that reflected Sarmatian cultural preferences. The continued use of fire altars and the worship of swords as sacred objects demonstrates the persistence of core Sarmatian religious concepts within Romanized contexts. Their spiritual identity remained intact, even as they embraced new forms of worship. Now comes the final transformation in this incredible story. The gradual Christianization of Sarmatian communities began during the late 2nd century AD through contact with Christian missionaries and merchants traveling along Danubian trade routes. The earliest evidence for Christian practices among Sarmatians comes from burial contexts where traditional grave goods are absent and bodies are oriented according to Christian burial practices. What's fascinating is how the spread of Christianity was facilitated by its compatibility with certain aspects of Sarmatian religious traditions, particularly the emphasis on spiritual warfare and the veneration of martyrs as warrior saints. This wasn't forced conversion, this was organic spiritual evolution that resonated with their warrior culture. The development of Christian communities among settled Sarmatians created new forms of cultural identity that transcended ethnic boundaries while preserving important elements of traditional social organization. Christian Sarmatian communities maintained their distinctive languages and kinship structures while participating in broader networks of religious affiliation that connected them to Christian populations throughout the Roman Empire. Archaeological evidence from church sites in Pannonia and Dacia shows architectural features that reflect Sarmatian cultural preferences, including the use of traditional decorative motifs and the incorporation of spaces for community gatherings that served both religious and social functions. The story of the Sarmatians represents one of history's most remarkable journeys, from the windswept steppes of their origins to the fertile farmlands of Roman provinces, from fierce independence to willing partnership, from ancient traditions to Christian faith. Their ability to adapt while preserving their essential identity, to integrate while maintaining their distinctiveness, and to transform while honoring their heritage makes them one of antiquity's most fascinating peoples. The Sarmatians didn't just survive the collapse of their nomadic world Amai, they helped build the new world that replaced it, contributing their military expertise, cultural traditions, and innovative spirit to the foundations of medieval Europe. Their legacy lives on in archaeological sites across the continent, in the genetic heritage of modern populations, and in the continuing fascination they inspire among scholars and history enthusiasts who recognize them as one of the ancient world's most remarkable civilizations. Now let's dive into something absolutely fascinating about these Romano-Sarmatian communities. The material culture demonstrates the most incredible selective adoption of Roman technologies and artistic styles, while maintaining distinctive characteristics that reflected their proud steppe heritage. This wasn't just copying Roman ways this was brilliant cultural synthesis. Pottery production in these communities perfectly exemplifies this amazing fusion. They combined Roman wheel-throwing techniques with traditional Sarmatian decorative traditions, creating distinctive ceramic styles that can be identified at archaeological sites throughout the Danubian provinces. What's remarkable is how they took the best of both worlds and created something entirely new. The metalwork traditions showed similar patterns of cultural synthesis, with Roman techniques for producing iron tools and weapons combined with traditional Sarmatian expertise in creating decorative elements and specialized cavalry equipment. The preservation of traditional Sarmatian artistic motifs within Roman cultural contexts created distinctive regional styles that influenced the development of provincial Roman art throughout the Danubian frontier regions. Bronze work from Romano-Sarmatian workshops tells an incredible story of cultural continuity. These pieces show the continued use of animal-style decorative elements, particularly stylized representations of horses, eagles, and other creatures that held deep symbolic significance in traditional Sarmatian culture. These motifs were brilliantly adapted to Roman artistic contexts through their incorporation into belt fittings, jewelry, and decorative elements for military equipment that served both functional and symbolic purposes. The textile traditions of Romano-Sarmatian communities preserve sophisticated weaving techniques and decorative patterns that had been developed during centuries of nomadic life. Archaeological evidence from waterlogged sites has preserved fragments of woolen textiles with complex geometric patterns and color schemes that demonstrate the amazing continuation of traditional Sarmatian artistic traditions. What's absolutely fascinating is that the production of these textiles required specialized knowledge of dyeing techniques and pattern weaving that was passed down through female lineages and represented an important source of cultural continuity within assimilating communities. The women were literally weaving their heritage into the fabric of their new lives. The horse breeding traditions that had been central to Sarmatian culture continued to play crucial roles in Romano-Sarmatian communities, though brilliantly adapted to the requirements of settled agricultural life. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites shows the construction of specialized facilities for horse breeding and training, including enclosed paddocks and covered stables that represented significant investments in maintaining high-quality breeding stock. The horses produced by these communities were highly valued by Roman military authorities and provided an important source of income that helped finance the transition to agricultural lifestyles. They had found a way to monetize their greatest cultural treasure. The archaeological record of Romano-Sarmatian burial practices reveals the gradual transformation of traditional mortuary rituals while preserving core elements that maintained connections to ancestral traditions. Early Romano-Sarmatian burials often included both traditional Sarmatian grave goods such as weapons and horse equipment alongside Roman items such as coins and pottery vessels. The evolution of burial practices over time shows the increasing influence of Roman customs, but with persistent elements such as the orientation of graves and the inclusion of specific categories of grave goods that reflected continuing adherence to traditional beliefs about death and the afterlife. The economic integration of Sarmatian communities into Roman commercial networks created new opportunities for prosperity, while requiring adaptations to market-oriented production systems. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites shows the development of specialized craft production aimed at both local consumption and export to Roman urban markets. Sarmatian metalworkers found ready markets for their distinctive decorative objects and military equipment, while agricultural products from settled communities contributed to the food supply systems that supported Roman military garrisons and urban populations throughout the Danubian provinces. But just when it seemed like the Sarmatians had successfully adapted to Roman life, the steppe world was about to be turned upside down once again. The emergence of the Alans as the dominant force within the Sarmatian confederations during the 3rd century AD marked a fundamental transformation in the political and cultural landscape of the Pontic steppes. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Don and Kuban rivers indicates that Alanic groups, originally concentrated in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains, began expanding northward into traditional Sarmatian territories around 220 AD. This wasn't just migration, Mies, this was conquest on a massive scale. The material culture from this period shows distinctive changes in burial practices, weapon types, and decorative arts that reflect the gradual absorption of existing Sarmatian populations into a new political framework dominated by Alanic leadership structures. The initial phase of Alanic expansion appears to have been facilitated by internal conflicts within established Sarmatian confederations, particularly disputes over succession rights and territorial boundaries that had weakened traditional political alliances. The Sarmatians were vulnerable, and the Alans seized the moment. Excavations at the Kobiakovo settlement on the Lower Don reveal evidence of violent destruction around 230 AD, followed by the construction of new defensive works using techniques characteristic of Alanic military engineering. The burned layer contains fragments of Sarmatian weapons and pottery, alongside the remains of structures that were systematically dismantled, suggesting organized conquest rather than gradual cultural assimilation. The Alanic military organization that emerged during this period represented a synthesis of traditional Sarmatian cavalry tactics, with innovations derived from contact with Caucasian mountain peoples and Roman military practices. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits at Novacherkassk shows the development of improved lance designs that incorporated reinforced socket construction and counterweight systems that enhanced the effectiveness of cavalry charges. The metallurgical analysis of these weapons reveals sophisticated forging techniques that produced lighter, yet stronger lance points capable of penetrating the improved armor systems that were simultaneously being developed by Hellenic craftsmen. This was military technology evolution in real time. The evolution of Hellenic heavy cavalry tactics during the 3rd century involved significant modifications to traditional Sarmatian cataphract formations that reflected lessons learned from decades of contact with Roman military forces. The tactical innovations included the development of deeper formation structures that could maintain momentum through multiple charge phases, as well as improved coordination between heavy cavalry units and supporting light cavalry forces equipped with composite bows. Archaeological evidence from training grounds near Tanais reveals the construction of practice facilities where cavalry formations could rehearse complex maneuvers, including parallel approaches, feigned retreats, and coordinated wheeling movements that maximize the impact of successive charge attacks. The technological advances achieved by Hellenic metalworkers during this period established new standards for both defensive and offensive equipment that influenced military development throughout the region. The scale armor systems produced in Hellenic workshops featured improved articulation between individual plates that provided greater flexibility without sacrificing protective coverage. The manufacturing process involved sophisticated heat treatment techniques that created armor scales with hardened surfaces and flexible cores, allowing warriors to maintain mobility while gaining protection against both missile weapons and direct combat strikes. Excavations at the Kobiakovo workshop complex have revealed specialized tools for scale production, including forming dies, quenching baths, and finishing equipment that demonstrate the industrial scale of Hellenic armor production. The development of improved horse breeding programs under Hellenic leadership produced cavalry mounts that were larger and more powerful than their Sarmatian predecessors. Osteological analysis of horse remains from Hellenic burial sites indicates animals averaging 150–155 centimeters in height, representing a significant increase over earlier Sarmatian breeds. These horses were bred specifically for carrying heavily armored warriors over long distances while maintaining the speed and agility necessary for effective cavalry operations. The Alans had taken everything the Sarmatians had perfected and made it even better. The breeding programs that created these magnificent war horses required extensive knowledge of equine genetics and careful selection of breeding stock that was maintained through detailed oral traditions passed down through specialized horsekeeping families. This wasn't just animal husbandry might, this was genetic engineering by ancient masters who understood bloodlines and characteristics better than many modern breeders. But the Hellenic approach to territorial organization went far beyond superior horses. They differed significantly from earlier Sarmatian practices through the establishment of more centralized political structures that could effectively coordinate military operations across vast geographical areas. This was political innovation on a scale the steppes had never seen before. Archaeological evidence from major Hellenic centers such as the settlement at Kobiakovo reveals something absolutely remarkable. The construction of substantial administrative buildings with specialized storage facilities for weapons, armor, and other military equipment. These centers served as regional headquarters where tribal leaders could coordinate seasonal campaigns, distribute military supplies, and maintain communication networks that connected scattered nomadic groups across the steppes. This was organizational sophistication that rivaled the greatest empires of the ancient world, all while maintaining the mobility and flexibility that made steppe peoples so formidable. The integration of remaining Sarmatian populations into the Hellenic tribal union proceeded through a brilliant combination of military conquest, political alliance, and cultural assimilation that preserved important elements of traditional steppe society while establishing new hierarchical relationships. What's remarkable is how smaller Sarmatian groups that submitted voluntarily to Hellenic authority were typically allowed to maintain their traditional leadership structures and territorial claims, but were required to provide military service and tribute to Hellenic overlords. This wasn't brutal conquest. This was sophisticated political integration that maintained stability while expanding power. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the region shows the gradual adoption of Alanic material culture traditions, alongside the persistence of local customs and practices that maintain distinct regional identities within the broader confederation. The absorption of Sarmatian populations involves systematic efforts to integrate their specialized skills and knowledge into Alanic military and economic systems. Sarmatian craftsmen who possessed expertise in specific metalwork techniques or decorative arts were often relocated to major Alanic centers where they could train local artisans and contribute to the development of new production capabilities. The workshop areas at Kobiakovo contain evidence of multi-ethnic craft production, with tools and techniques characteristic of different Sarmatian regional traditions combined in single production facilities that created hybrid technological systems. This was cultural fusion, creating military and economic advantages on an unprecedented scale. The cultural continuity that characterized the Alanic transformation reflected deliberate policies aimed at preserving valuable elements of Sarmatian tradition, while establishing new political and military frameworks. Traditional Sarmatian religious practices, including fire worship and sword veneration, were maintained within Alanic communities, but were integrated into new ceremonial contexts that emphasized the authority of Alanic leadership. Archaeological evidence from religious sites shows the construction of larger fire altars and ceremonial spaces that could accommodate the expanded populations of consolidated tribal groups, while maintaining the essential ritual elements that connected communities to their ancestral traditions. The preservation of traditional Sarmatian burial practices within Alanic cultural contexts demonstrates the systematic approach taken by Alanic leaders to maintain social stability during the process of political transformation. The Kurgan burial tradition continued under Alanic rule, but with modifications that reflected new political hierarchies and military organizations. Elite Alanic burials from the 3rd and 4th centuries contain traditional Sarmatian grave goods such as mirrors, jewelry, and weapons, but arranged according to new symbolic systems that emphasize the integration of different cultural traditions within unified political structures. The linguistic evidence for the Alanic transformation reveals the gradual displacement of regional Sarmatian dialects by Alanic language varieties that became the standard for official communication and military commands throughout the Confederation. Personal names preserved in Greek and Latin inscriptions from this period show the increasing dominance of Alanic linguistic forms, though with persistent elements from earlier Sarmatian naming traditions that indicate the preservation of family lineages and clan identities within the new political framework. The development of Alanic political institutions during this period created new mechanisms for managing the complex relationships between different ethnic groups and territorial units within the expanding confederation. The traditional Sarmatian system of autonomous tribal leaders was modified through the establishment of regional governors who answered directly to Alanic supreme commanders while maintaining authority over local populations. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers shows the construction of meeting halls and storage facilities that supported regular gatherings of regional leaders for coordination of military campaigns, distribution of tribute, and resolution of territorial disputes. This was government by confederation on a scale that anticipates medieval European political structures. The military innovations introduced during the Alanic transformation extended beyond improvements in weapons and tactics to include new approaches to logistics and campaign organization that enhanced the effectiveness of large-scale military operations. The development of standardized equipment specifications allowed for more efficient production and maintenance of military supplies, while improved communication systems enabled better coordination between widely separated military units. Archaeological evidence from supply depots along major migration routes shows the establishment of cached weapons and equipment that could support extended military campaigns without requiring constant resupply from distant production centers. This was military logistics centuries ahead of its time. But the ultimate test of Alanic power came with their expansion westward into the Dnieper River Valley, which brought them into direct contact with Gothic populations that had established themselves in former Scythian territories during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. The initial encounters between Alanic and Gothic forces occurred around 250 AD, when Alanic cavalry units began conducting reconnaissance operations in preparation for larger territorial acquisitions. Archaeological evidence from border regions shows the construction of temporary fortifications and supply caches that indicate systematic military planning for extended operations in unfamiliar territories. The relationship between Alanic confederations and Gothic kingdoms evolved through a series of military conflicts and diplomatic negotiations that established new territorial boundaries and political arrangements throughout the Western steppes. The Gothic ability to field large infantry formations provided them with defensive capabilities that could counter Alanic cavalry advantages under certain tactical conditions, leading to the development of new military strategies on both sides. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites shows the evolution of combined arms tactics that integrated cavalry and infantry operations in ways that maximized the strengths of each military system. This was military innovation driven by necessity and refined by experience. The economic foundations of Alanic power rested on their ability to control trade routes connecting the Black Sea region with Central Asian and Chinese markets that had become increasingly important during the 3rd century AD. The Alanic position at the western terminus of the Silk Road trade networks provided them with access to luxury goods and manufactured items that could be distributed throughout their territories to maintain political loyalty and military effectiveness. Archaeological evidence from trading centers such as Tanais shows the expansion of commercial facilities and the construction of specialized storage buildings designed to handle increased volumes of long-distance trade goods. The integration of agricultural populations into Alanic territorial systems represented a significant departure from traditional nomadic practices that reflected the changing economic and political circumstances of the late imperial period. The Alans weren't just conquerors mined, they were state builders who understood that lasting power required economic foundations as well as military might. This incredible story of the Sarmatians and their Alanic successors shows us how steppe civilizations could evolve, adapt, and transform while maintaining their essential character. From the original Sarmatian emergence on the Pontic-Caspian steppes to the sophisticated Alanic confederation that would eventually contribute to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, these peoples demonstrated remarkable resilience, innovation, and adaptability. Their legacy lives on not just in archaeological discoveries, but in the genetic and cultural heritage of modern populations across Europe and Asia, in military innovations that influenced warfare for centuries, and in the ongoing fascination they inspire among anyone interested in how human societies adapt to changing circumstances while preserving their essential identity. The Sarmatian saga reminds us that history's most compelling stories aren't always about the rise and fall of great empires, but about the remarkable peoples who shaped the world through their determination, innovation, and refusal to simply disappear into the past. The establishment of permanent settlements in river valleys provided Alanic confederations with something absolutely revolutionary: reliable sources of grain and other agricultural products that could support larger populations and more complex military organizations than any steppe society had ever achieved before. Archaeological evidence from agricultural settlements in the Don and Kuban valleys shows the development of mixed farming systems that combined crop production with livestock management in ways that maintained essential elements of pastoral culture, while providing economic diversification that would change everything. This wasn't just adaptation this was the creation of an entirely new model of steppe civilization that combined the best of nomadic and sedentary worlds. But the Alans weren't finished revolutionizing their world. The technological innovations achieved by Alanic craftsmen during this period established new standards for metalwork and decorative arts that influenced cultural development throughout the entire region. The polychrome jewelry style that had characterized earlier Sarmatian elite culture was refined and expanded through the incorporation of new materials and techniques that created more complex and sophisticated decorative effects than anything seen before. Archaeological analysis of jewelry from Alanic burial sites reveals something absolutely stunning. The use of garnets, colored glass, and precious metals in combination with traditional materials to create objects that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic innovation on a level that rivals the greatest workshops of Constantinople or Rome. The development of Alanic artistic traditions represented a brilliant synthesis of inherited Sarmatian motifs, with influences derived from contact with Roman, Persian, and Central Asian cultural traditions. The animal-style art that had been characteristic of steppe cultures was transformed through the incorporation of new symbolic elements and decorative techniques that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Alanic society. Bronze plaques and decorative fittings from this period show the continued use of traditional animal motifs combined with geometric patterns and figural representations that demonstrate exposure to diverse artistic influences through expanded trade networks and diplomatic contacts. This was artistic fusion on an unprecedented scale. The religious syncretism that developed within Alanic communities during the 3rd and 4th centuries created new spiritual traditions that combined traditional steppe beliefs with elements derived from Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and other religious systems encountered through territorial expansion and commercial contacts. Archaeological evidence from religious sites shows the construction of new types of ceremonial buildings that incorporated architectural features from different cultural traditions, while maintaining essential elements of traditional fire worship and ancestor veneration. The religious innovations reflected the multicultural nature of Alanic society, while providing spiritual frameworks that could unite diverse populations under common political authority. But now comes the most dramatic chapter yet in this incredible story. The consolidation of Alanic power across the Pontic steppes during the late 3rd century AD coincided with the emergence of Gothic confederations as the dominant force in the territories between the Dniester and Dnieper rivers. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Cherniakov and Santana de Muret reveals the establishment of Gothic settlements that combined agricultural production with craft specialization, creating economic foundations that could support large military forces and sustain territorial expansion. The material culture from these sites demonstrates Gothic adoption of Roman building techniques and pottery traditions, while maintaining distinctive metalwork practices that reflected their Germanic cultural heritage. This was a collision course between two of the most formidable barbarian powers of the late ancient world. The first documented military encounters between Alanic and Gothic forces occurred around 270 AD, when Alanic reconnaissance units began probing Gothic defensive positions along the Dniester River Valley. These initial contacts revealed fundamental differences in military organization and tactical doctrine that would shape subsequent conflicts between the two confederations. Gothic military forces consisted primarily of infantry formations armed with spears, shields, and swords, supported by limited numbers of cavalry units that lacked the heavy armor and specialized equipment characteristic of Alanic cataphracts. The Gothic emphasis on defensive warfare reflected their territorial objectives and agricultural economic base, which required the protection of fixed settlements and cultivated lands. This created an absolutely fascinating military problem. The tactical challenges posed by Gothic military organization forced Alanic commanders to develop entirely new approaches to cavalry warfare that could effectively engage infantry formations operating from prepared defensive positions. Traditional Sarmatian tactics had emphasized mobility and the exploitation of open terrain to achieve decisive cavalry charges, but Gothic defensive strategies involved the use of fortified settlements, earthwork barriers, and coordinated spear formations that neutralized many advantages of mounted warfare. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites near the Dniester reveals the development of new Alanic tactical formations that integrated dismounted combat with traditional cavalry operations, allowing mounted warriors to engage enemy infantry on more equal terms. This was military innovation driven by necessity and refined by battlefield experience. The evolution of Alanic military equipment during this period reflected the need to adapt traditional steppe warfare methods to the challenges posed by Gothic defensive tactics. Weapon deposits from sites such as Novocherkass contain examples of modified lance designs that featured reinforced points capable of penetrating shield walls and spear formations, while maintaining the length and balance necessary for effective mounted combat. The metallurgical analysis of these weapons reveals sophisticated forging techniques that created lance points with hardened tips and flexible shafts that could withstand the stresses of infantry combat without breaking during cavalry charges. This was weapons technology evolution happening in real time on ancient battlefields. The development of combined arms tactics represented a significant innovation in steppe military doctrine that emerged from the practical necessities of fighting Gothic infantry formations. Alanic commanders learned to coordinate heavy cavalry charges with supporting attacks by light cavalry armed with composite bows, creating tactical combinations that could disrupt enemy formations before delivering decisive mounted assaults. Archaeological evidence from training areas near major Alanic settlements shows the construction of practice facilities, where cavalry units could rehearse complex maneuvers involving coordinated approaches, feigned retreats, and successive charge attacks that maximize the effectiveness of different types of mounted warriors. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that shows the sophisticated political thinking of these so-called barbarian leaders. The diplomatic dimensions of Alanic Gothic relations involved complex negotiations that reflected the territorial ambitions of both confederations, while recognizing the military capabilities that each could bring to potential alliance arrangements. The Gothic kingdoms possessed superior capabilities for siege warfare and the defense of fortified positions, while Alanic confederations provided unmatched mobility and the ability to conduct rapid strategic movements across vast territories. The complementary nature of these military capabilities created opportunities for cooperation against common enemies, particularly the Roman Empire, which posed threats to the territorial expansion of both confederations. The first major Alanic Gothic alliance was formed around 290 AD in response to Roman military operations aimed at reasserting imperial control over territories north of the Danube River. Archaeological evidence from Gothic settlements in Moldavia shows the presence of Alanic military equipment and burial practices, indicating the deployment of significant Alanic forces in support of Gothic territorial claims. The material culture from these sites demonstrates the development of hybrid military traditions that combined Gothic infantry tactics with Alanic cavalry operations, creating new forms of combined arms warfare that proved highly effective against Roman legionary formations. This alliance would ultimately contribute to some of the most dramatic military campaigns in ancient history, including the Gothic Wars that would shake the Roman Empire to its foundations and help usher in the medieval world. The story of the Sarmatians and their Alanic successors represents one of history's most remarkable evolutionary journeys, from nomadic herders to sophisticated state builders, from fierce independence to strategic alliance making, from traditional steppe culture to cosmopolitan civilization. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and transform while maintaining their essential warrior identity makes them one of antiquity's most fascinating peoples. Their legacy lives on in the archaeological record that continues to reveal new insights into their remarkable civilization, in the genetic and cultural heritage of modern populations across Europe and Asia, and in the military and political innovations that helped shape the transition from the ancient to the medieval world. The Sarmatians didn't just witness history misha, they helped create it through their remarkable journey across 8 centuries of dramatic change and adaptation. Picture this: the year is 290 AD, and something unprecedented is happening along Rome's northern borders. The largest barbarian military alliance since the devastating Marcomannic Wars nearly a century earlier is taking shape. But this isn't just another random raid by desperate tribes looking for quick plunder. What's unfolding is something far more sophisticated and terrifying for Roman commanders watching from their fortress walls. The Atlantic Gothic confederations are doing something that would make modern military strategists take notice. They're conducting joint operations that require the kind of planning and coordination that most people assume didn't exist in the ancient world. These weren't spontaneous attacks driven by hunger or desperation. Archaeological discoveries along the invasion routes tell a completely different story, one that reveals military minds capable of thinking several moves ahead. When researchers excavated temporary camps used during these campaigns, they found something remarkable. The barbarian forces had constructed standardized offensive works and supply depots. Think about what this means for a moment. Different tribal groups speaking different languages and following different customs somehow managed to agree on common construction standards and supply chain logistics. They created systems that could sustain military operations hundreds of miles from their home territories. The tactical innovation happening on these ancient battlefields would have impressed any military academy instructor. Atlantic heavy cavalry and Gothic infantry weren't just fighting alongside each other, they were integrating their completely different fighting styles into something new and devastatingly effective. Gothic spear formations became the defensive backbone that allowed Atlantic mounted warriors to charge deep into enemy lines without worrying about being cut off or surrounded. This mobile warfare doctrine gave them incredible flexibility on the battlefield. When Roman forces tried to corner them, The combined Atlantic Gothic armies could simply melt away, only to concentrate their full strength exactly where and when they chose to strike. Archaeological evidence from battle sites like Aretas shows us tactical formations that merged the best elements of both military traditions while eliminating their individual vulnerabilities. What archaeologists discovered when they excavated these defensive positions will change how you think about ancient military engineering forever. We're not talking about simple earthworks or basic fortifications. The evidence reveals military construction projects that incorporated multiple defensive lines, sophisticated supply depot networks, and communication systems designed for one terrifying purpose: sustained resistance against the unstoppable Hunnic war machine. But something even more dramatic was happening beneath the surface of this military crisis. The constant pressure from Hunnic expansion was tearing apart the very fabric of Hellenic society. Traditional power structures that had existed for centuries were crumbling, and the old rules no longer applied. Hereditary clan leaders who had ruled through birthright suddenly found themselves displaced by war chiefs whose only qualification was their ability to keep their people alive. The burial sites from this period tell an incredible story of social revolution. When archaeologists examined graves from the 370 Sev, they found something unprecedented. Military equipment and symbols of authority were being distributed according to completely different criteria than had existed in earlier Hellenic society. Merit on the battlefield now mattered more than ancient bloodlines. The old aristocracy was being swept away by the demands of survival. The Hellenic political unity that had lasted for generations shattered under this relentless pressure. Different leadership groups emerged, each pursuing desperate strategies to deal with the crisis bearing down on them. Some leaders made the unthinkable choice, negotiating tributary relationships with their Hunnic conquerors. Archaeological evidence shows us communities where traditional Hellenic pottery and tools appear alongside Hunnic burial practices and ceremonial objects. These weren't conquered peoples, but communities trying to preserve something of their identity while bowing to new masters. Other Hellenic groups made an even more dramatic decision. They abandoned their ancestral steplands entirely, migrating westward into Roman territories. But this wasn't a chaotic refugee flight. The archaeological record reveals organized mass movements of entire communities, complete with livestock, portable possessions, and careful planning. They were trading their freedom for imperial protection, offering their legendary cavalry skills to Roman commanders desperate for military allies. The Romans, facing their own existential crisis, couldn't afford to refuse. Hellenic heavy cavalry units that had once terrorized Roman borders now became essential components of imperial defensive strategies. Archaeological excavations at military installations show the rapid construction of specialized facilities designed to house and equip these foreign cavalry units. The scale of expansion at these sites reveals just how desperately Rome needed these barbarian allies. The settlement of Hellenic populations across Gaul, Spain, and North Africa during the late 4th and early 5th centuries created something remarkable: dispersed centers of steppe culture trying to survive in completely alien environments. These communities faced an impossible challenge. How do you maintain nomadic traditions while living as settled farmers? The archaeological evidence shows incredible innovation as these displaced peoples developed new forms of livestock management and adapted their traditional crafts to work with local materials and markets. But here's what makes their story even more extraordinary. They never forgot who they were. Despite geographical dispersion and political fragmentation, Hellenic communities maintained their distinctive military traditions. Their cavalry units continued to use traditional weapons and armor, preserving specialized military knowledge that remained valuable across the changing landscape of late antiquity. The material culture from military sites across the former Western Empire shows the continued production of distinctively Hellenic equipment, proof that their warrior traditions survived displacement and cultural pressure. Then came 375 AD, the year everything changed forever. The catastrophic collapse of Hellenic resistance to Hunnic expansion triggered one of the most significant population movements in European history. Entire confederations abandoned territories their ancestors had held for centuries, joining the massive wave of barbarian migrations that would reshape the Western Roman Empire beyond recognition. The archaeological evidence from this moment is heartbreaking. Sites like Capiakovo along the Don and Kuban rivers show clear destruction layers followed by complete abandonment. Excavations reveal buried caches of valuable objects that were never recovered, suggesting people who expected to return home but never could. The rapidly changing military situation had made their homeland uninhabitable. But the most audacious chapter in this incredible story was yet to come. The strategic planning required for the African expedition would have challenged even modern military logistics experts. We're talking about coordinating different tribal groups to execute an amphibious invasion across the Mediterranean Sea, something that had never been attempted on this scale by barbarian forces. The archaeological evidence from Spanish coastal ports reveals something that will blow your mind. These weren't desperate raiders hoping to steal a few Roman ships. The Vandal-Hellenic Confederation was constructing specialized facilities designed specifically for building and maintaining transport vessels. They were engineering a fleet capable of moving thousands of warriors, their horses, and all their equipment across the water barrier that Romans had always believed would protect North Africa from barbarian invasion. When you think about what this required, it's staggering. Different tribal groups, each with their own traditions and languages, somehow coordinated the construction of vessels, the timing of departures, and the logistics of feeding both humans and horses during a sea voyage. This was military planning at a level that most people assumed didn't exist in the ancient world. Once they reached North Africa, these displaced steppe peoples faced an even greater challenge. How do you govern sedentary agricultural populations when your entire cultural identity is built around nomadic life? The archaeological evidence from sites like Hippo Regius and the Vest shows us their remarkable solution. They created distinctive settlement patterns that somehow merged traditional Hellenic livestock management with Mediterranean agricultural techniques. The material culture from these sites tells a fascinating story of selective adaptation. They adopted Roman building methods and pottery traditions when it served their purposes, but they never abandoned the essential elements that made them who they were. Their metalworking techniques and decorative arts remained distinctively Hellenic, preserving cultural identity within this completely foreign territorial context. The political genius of their solution becomes clear when you examine the inscriptional evidence from North African cities. Hellenic nobles maintained authority over their traditional followers while simultaneously being integrated into the broader Vandal administrative system. They held positions that combined military command with civilian governance, creating hybrid governmental systems that incorporated both Germanic and steppe political traditions. Latin titles on inscriptions reveal officials with distinctly Hellenic names, proving how successfully they navigated this complex integration. Perhaps most impressive was their adaptation to naval warfare. Traditional steppe warriors had spent their entire lives fighting on horseback across grasslands. Now they were serving as marines aboard Vandal vessels, providing boarding capabilities and close combat expertise for Mediterranean naval operations. Archaeological evidence from shipwreck sites shows Hellenic weapons that had been specifically modified for naval use, including shortened swords and specialized armor systems that provided protection while allowing the mobility necessary for fighting aboard ships. The environmental challenges they faced in North Africa were equally daunting. Desert and semi-desert conditions demanded completely new approaches to horse management and tactical deployment. The grassland warfare methods that had dominated the Pontic steppes had to be reimagined for environments their ancestors never could have imagined. Archaeological evidence from military sites in the Atlas Mountain region reveals specialized facilities for maintaining cavalry forces in arid conditions, including improved water storage systems and fodder production techniques adapted to the local climate. The religious and cultural synthesis that emerged in these North African communities reflects the incredible complexity of their new environment. Traditional Hellenic beliefs didn't just encounter Roman Christianity, they were mixing with indigenous Berber spiritual traditions and residual influences from earlier Carthaginian religious practices. Cemetery excavations show burial practices that combine traditional Hellenic grave goods with local customs and Christian symbols, creating hybrid mortuary traditions that perfectly captured the multicultural nature of Vandal North Africa. Fire altars discovered at settlement sites prove that traditional Hellenic religious practices continued alongside the gradual adoption of Christian beliefs and architectural forms. The preservation of their linguistic traditions is evidenced by personal names and inscriptions that maintained characteristic Hellenic phonological features, despite the official adoption of Latin for commercial and administrative purposes. Families continued speaking Hellenic languages for generations, maintaining oral traditions that connected these North African communities to their steppe heritage. The pottery discoveries from these sites reveal something extraordinary about cultural survival and adaptation. When archaeologists examined ceramic assemblages from Visigothic territories, they found clear evidence of Hellenic decorative traditions influencing local production methods. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. The metalwork from these same sites shows traditional Hellenic techniques being used alongside Visigothic and Roman technological innovations. These weren't conquered peoples abandoning their heritage, but skilled craftsmen creating entirely new hybrid traditions. The political arrangements they negotiated were nothing short of genius. Hellenic nobles managed to preserve their traditional clan leadership structures while accepting integration into the broader Germanic administrative system. They maintained authority over their followers but provided military service to Visigothic kings and participated in territorial governance. Legal evidence from Visigothic law codes shows specific provisions for managing these complex relationships, including regulations governing Hellenic property rights, marriage customs, and military obligations that recognize their distinct cultural identity while ensuring political loyalty. The religious transformation happening in these communities reflects the incredible theological complexity of the period. Traditional Hellenic beliefs weren't just encountering Catholic Christianity, they were mixing with Arian Christianity and residual Roman pagan practices, creating something entirely new. Archaeological evidence from church sites shows architectural forms that incorporated traditional Hellenic decorative elements within Christian religious contexts, creating hybrid sacred spaces that could serve multicultural congregations. Rather than completely abandoning their customs, Hellenic populations were adapting traditional practices to fit Christian theological frameworks. The Suevi kingdom in northwestern Spain created yet another distinct center of Hellenic culture under completely different conditions. Archaeological evidence from sites in Galicia and northern Portugal shows agricultural settlements that brilliantly combine traditional Hellenic livestock management with local farming techniques, adapted to Atlantic climate and mountainous terrain. The material culture demonstrates selective adoption of local building materials while maintaining essential elements of Hellenic decorative arts and craft traditions. Their military adaptations in the Iberian Peninsula required incredible tactical innovation. Cavalry operations in mountainous terrain against both Roman forces and other barbarian groups demanded completely new approaches to logistics and supply. Archaeological evidence from military sites shows traditional Hellenic weapons alongside local weapon types, better suited to Iberian warfare requirements. These weren't rigid traditionalists clinging to outdated methods, but adaptive warriors constantly evolving their techniques. But here's where the story takes a bittersweet turn. The Tuwidjalans of distinct Hellenic ethnic identity during the 5th and 6th centuries resulted from geographical dispersion, intermarriage, and the adoption of local cultural practices that slowly replaced traditional steppe customs. The archaeological record shows increasing integration of Hellenic material culture elements into broader regional traditions. Distinctive Hellenic decorative motifs and technical practices became part of the general cultural repertoire of various European regions rather than markers of specific ethnic identity. The process of cultural assimilation proceeded at different rates depending on local circumstances and contact with other Hellenic communities. Yet even as distinct Hellenic political entities disappeared, their contributions to European civilization were becoming permanently embedded in military technology, decorative arts, and livestock management. The archaeological evidence shows widespread adoption of improved cavalry equipment designs, integration of steppe decorative motifs into local artistic traditions, and development of new horse breeding approaches that enhanced military capabilities across European kingdoms. The linguistic legacy they left behind is remarkable. Place names throughout France, Spain, and North Africa derive from Hellenic linguistic roots, indicating the widespread distribution of their settlements. In France, the concentration of Hellenic toponyms in the Loire Valley and Armorican Peninsula preserves the ethnic designation of their founders in forms like Elaine, Elaine-Court, and Allenville, demonstrating the phonological evolution of Hellenic elements within Romance language contexts. Personal names preserved in medieval documents show the continuation of Hellenic naming traditions within families that maintained awareness of their steppe heritage, even after adopting local cultural practices and political allegiances. The technical knowledge preserved in their innovations represented the distillation of centuries of steppe cultural development that continued influencing European civilization long after its original context had vanished. The dissolution of the last recognizable Sarmatian Alanic political entities during the 6th century marked the end of nearly a millennium of steppe dominance across the Pontic regions. The final Alanic principalities along the northern Caucasus foothills, which had maintained semi-autonomous status under successive waves of Hunnic, Avar, and early Turkic overlordship, were gradually absorbed into the expanding sphere of Byzantine influence and emerging Khazar power during 630–650 AD. Archaeological evidence from sites like Miskaya and Alkanala reveals the systematic transformation of traditional Alanic settlement patterns with stone fortifications using Byzantine architectural techniques alongside maintenance of traditional craft workshops and burial practices. Even in their final transformation, they preserved essential elements of steppe cultural identity while adapting to new political realities. The survival of these place names through centuries of political upheaval and population shifts tells us something profound about the demographic impact these warrior peoples had on medieval Europe. We're not talking about a few scattered settlements that disappeared into history. The persistence of local traditions that maintained awareness of their historical origins proves just how deeply these Sarmatian roots had grown into European soil. Here's where the story becomes even more remarkable. The preservation of Alanic personal names within medieval European naming systems provides crushing evidence for their continued cultural influence long after their political independence had vanished. The name Alan itself became a mark of prestige across Western Europe, appearing in royal genealogies and aristocratic family traditions that proudly claimed descent from these legendary warrior elites. In Brittany, the overwhelming popularity of Alanic names like Alan, Alain, and their derivatives wasn't just medieval fashion trends. These names reflected genuine genealogical connections to Alanic settler populations whose descendants had maintained positions of local prominence for generations. The onomastic evidence from medieval charters and chronicles reveals something extraordinary: the systematic preservation of Alanic naming traditions within specific family lineages that served as living repositories of cultural memory and ethnic identity. But their influence went far deeper than names. The linguistic borrowings that entered European languages during the migration period include highly specialized technical terms related to military equipment, horse management, and pastoral practices. This specialized knowledge became permanently embedded in medieval European civilization. In medieval Latin texts, words like contus for the long lance and cataphractus for heavily armored cavalry demonstrate how Sarmatian military terminology became standard vocabulary for European warfare. The Romance languages preserve numerous loanwords related to horse breeding and cavalry equipment that derive directly from Alanic linguistic sources, proving the continued importance of Sarmatian expertise in these specialized areas throughout the early medieval period. These weren't just borrowed words, but borrowed knowledge systems that transformed European military capabilities. The cultural contributions of Sarmatian Alanic populations to medieval European military development extended far beyond terminology to include fundamental innovations that revolutionized the nature of European warfare. The heavy cavalry formations that became the backbone of medieval European armies owed crucial technical elements to Sarmatian cataphract traditions. The development of coordinated charge tactics and the integration of lance combat with armored protection for both rider and mount came directly from steppe warfare innovations. Archaeological evidence from early medieval weapon deposits across Europe reveals continued production and use of lance designs that derive directly from Sarmatian prototypes. The metallurgical techniques and decorative elements demonstrate the preservation of steppe military traditions within European contexts. This wasn't cultural borrowing, but cultural transmission through living communities that maintained these traditions across generations. The evolution of medieval European armor systems incorporated numerous technical innovations that originated in Sarmatian workshops. The scale armor construction techniques perfected by Sarmatian craftsmen provided the foundation for developing more sophisticated protection systems, including the laminated armor designs that became characteristic of Byzantine and early medieval European military equipment. The specialized metallurgical knowledge required for producing these systems was preserved within craft traditions maintained by descendants of Sarmatian populations who had settled throughout European regions. Their artistic influence created something entirely new, distinctive regional styles that combined steppe animal motifs with local artistic preferences and Christian religious symbolism. The polychrome jewelry style that had characterized Sarmatian elite culture was adapted and transformed within European contexts, contributing to the development of the cloisonné and garnet inlay techniques that became hallmarks of early medieval European metalwork. Archaeological analysis of jewelry from Merovingian and Visigothic burial sites reveals technical processes and decorative elements that demonstrate direct continuity with Sarmatian artistic traditions. This proves the preservation of specialized craft knowledge within European workshops across centuries of cultural change. The animal-style art that had been central to Sarmatian cultural expression underwent systematic transformation within Christian European contexts. Traditional motifs were adapted to serve new symbolic functions while maintaining essential aesthetic characteristics. The stylized animal representations that appear in medieval European manuscript illumination, metalwork, and stone carving demonstrate the integration of steppe artistic traditions with Christian iconographic programs. Perhaps most fascinating is how their religious traditions influenced medieval European Christianity. The fire worship practices that had been central to Sarmatian religious life were adapted within Christian contexts through the emphasis on sacred flames and candle lighting that became characteristic of medieval European liturgical practices. Archaeological evidence from early medieval church sites reveals specialized areas for maintaining perpetual flames and the incorporation of fire altars into Christian sacred architecture in ways that clearly reflect Sarmatian religious influence. The veneration of warrior saints that became prominent in medieval European Christianity demonstrates the profound influence of Sarmatian cultural values on Christian spiritual traditions. The emphasis on military virtue and the sanctification of warfare that characterized medieval European religious thought reflected the integration of steppe warrior ethics with Christian theological frameworks. Hagiographical traditions around figures like Saint Martin of Tours and Saint Hinto Maurice incorporated elements that derive from Sarmatian concepts of sacred warfare and the spiritual significance of military service. Their practical contributions were equally transformative. The horse breeding programs established by Sarmatian populations in various European regions contributed crucial genetic stock and management techniques that enhanced the quality of medieval European cavalry mounts. The larger, more powerful horses developed for Sarmatian cataphract warfare provided the foundation for breeding programs that produced the destriers and other specialized war horses essential for medieval European heavy cavalry operations. Archaeological evidence from medieval horse burials reveals animals with physical characteristics that demonstrate the continued influence of Sarmatian breeding traditions, including the size, bone structure, and muscular development optimized for carrying heavily armored warriors. Even centuries after their political entities had disappeared, their expertise was still shaping the backbone of European military power. The pastoral management techniques developed during their centuries of nomadic life contributed important innovations to medieval European agricultural practices, particularly in regions where traditional farming methods were inadequate for local environmental conditions. The integration of livestock management with crop production that had characterized settled Sarmatian communities provided models for agricultural diversification that enhanced the productivity and sustainability of medieval European farming systems. The archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals something that would amaze any modern livestock expert. The widespread adoption of Sarmatian techniques for managing mixed herds, processing dairy products, and maintaining genetic diversity within livestock populations. These weren't just random farming improvements, but sophisticated systems developed over centuries of nomadic life that revolutionized European agriculture. But their military engineering genius went even further. The fortification techniques developed by Sarmatian communities for defending against nomadic raiders became the blueprint for medieval European defensive architecture. The earthwork construction methods and strategic placement of defensive works that characterized Sarmatian military engineering provided invaluable precedents for developing the Motta and Bailey castles that would dominate the medieval European landscapes for centuries. Archaeological analysis of early medieval fortifications reveals construction techniques and defensive features that demonstrate direct influence from Sarmatian military engineering knowledge on European fortress design. These weren't coincidental similarities, but clear technological transmission from nomadic masters to settled European builders. Modern archaeological discoveries have fundamentally transformed how scholars understand Sarmatian influence on medieval European development. The systematic excavation of sites across Europe has revealed the true extent and nature of cultural continuity between steppe and European traditions. The scale of their impact is staggering when you see the evidence laid out systematically. The excavation of the Novgorod birchbark documents delivered a bombshell revelation: Alanic personal names and linguistic elements within medieval Russian contexts that prove the continued presence and influence of Sarmatian populations in Eastern European regions long after their political independence had ended. The material culture from these sites shows the preservation of traditional Sarmatian craft techniques and decorative motifs within medieval Slavic cultural contexts. They hadn't disappeared, they had become part of the foundation of Slavic civilization. The analysis of medieval European burial sites using cutting-edge osteological and genetic techniques has revealed the true demographic impact of Sarmatian migration and settlement throughout Europe. Cytope analysis of skeletal remains from medieval cemeteries has identified individuals with childhood signatures consistent with steppe environments, proving continued migration and settlement from Sarmatian territories well into the medieval period. The genetic analysis is even more remarkable. These populations reveal the preservation of Central Asian and steppe genetic markers within European populations, demonstrating the biological legacy of Sarmatian settlement and intermarriage with local populations. Their DNA became part of Europe's genetic foundation. Scholarly debates surrounding Sarmatian influence on medieval European knightly culture have been revolutionized by new archaeological evidence revealing technical and cultural continuities between steppe warrior traditions and European chivalric practices. The excavation of early medieval weapon deposits has revealed lance designs, armor construction techniques, and horse equipment that demonstrate direct technological continuity with Sarmatian military traditions. The analysis of medieval European military manuals and treatises reveals tactical concepts and training methods that show clear influence of steppe warfare traditions on European cavalry doctrine development. The knights of medieval Europe were using battle tactics refined by nomadic warriors centuries earlier. The investigation of medieval European horse culture through archaeological and documentary evidence has revealed extensive influence from Sarmatian breeding programs and management techniques on European cavalry capabilities. Analysis of medieval horse remains reveals breeding practices that demonstrate continued application of Sarmatian genetic selection principles and management techniques developed for producing superior cavalry mounts. Documentary evidence from medieval horse breeding establishments reveals the preservation of Sarmatian terminology and technical knowledge within European equestrian traditions. Their expertise in horse breeding remained the gold standard for European cavalry development centuries after their political entities had vanished. The cultural memory of Sarmatian warrior traditions persisted within medieval European literary and historical traditions through chronicles, genealogies, and legendary narratives that preserved awareness of their historical significance. Medieval European chroniclers maintained records of Alanic settlements and military contributions that demonstrate continued recognition of their cultural distinctiveness and historical importance. The preservation of these traditions within medieval European historical consciousness reflects the lasting impact of Sarmatian cultural contributions on European civilization. They weren't forgotten peoples but recognized ancestors whose contributions were celebrated and remembered. The transformation of Sarmatian cultural elements within medieval European contexts created new synthetic traditions that preserved essential characteristics while adapting to changed political and social circumstances. The integration of Sarmatian military techniques with European feudal structures created new forms of cavalry organization that combined the mobility and shock capabilities of steppe warfare with the territorial and political requirements of medieval European society. The adaptation of Sarmatian craft traditions to European market conditions and aesthetic preferences created regional specializations that maintained technical excellence while serving new cultural functions. Their innovations became the foundation for European craftsmanship excellence. The final dissolution of distinct Sarmatian cultural identity occurred through gradual assimilation and cultural transformation that integrated their populations and traditions into the broader tapestry of medieval European civilization. By the 7th century AD, the last communities maintaining recognizable Sarmatian cultural practices had either been absorbed into emerging medieval kingdoms or evolved into new ethnic identities that preserved selected elements of their steppe heritage within transformed cultural contexts. The Ossetian people of the Caucasus represent the most direct descendants of the Sarmatian Alanic populations, maintaining linguistic and cultural traditions that provide crucial insights into ancient steppe civilization. They are living links to this vanished world. The legacy of the Sarmatians extends far beyond their historical period of political dominance, permeating the foundations of medieval European civilization through contributions to military technology, artistic traditions, religious practices, and agricultural techniques that continued influencing European development for centuries after their distinct political entities ceased to exist. Their transformation from nomadic steppe warriors into integral components of European medieval society represents one of the most successful examples of cultural adaptation and integration in human history. It demonstrates the dynamic nature of cultural identity and the enduring influence of technological and social innovations across temporal and geographical boundaries. The Sarmatian story isn't just ancient history minds, it's the story of how civilizations blend, adapt, and create something entirely new while preserving what matters most from the past.